One of the things that I said is that the American worker was the model for the world. They were skilled, they were disciplined, they were educated. Um, in fact, the American manufacturing and industrial system, as it became, was mainly due to the organizing of factory work by American workers, not by graduates of Harvard or MIT or University of Michigan. The workers, self-organized production. And you all have never seen it in your lives, but to see working men and women go to work and come home from work, proud, from factories, you know, and how the community, and I'm not making this up. I was a kid, this is what I was. The community looked up to them. So a kid, excuse me, a kid like the one that Alice and Brandon knows are reading Baldwin with, have never seen that. Have never seen men and women working. And so when the kid asks, I want to read Baldwin because I don't want to die. We can interpret that in so many ways. Social death, or the fact that he sees death all around him. So then I said, Alice, let's go down Lehigh Avenue. I was showing her some things, you know, some houses. I showed her when Mumia was arrested, where we started the movement. And then we got to 29th Street. I said, you know, turn left, we're going to go down 29th Street. Now, mind you, at one time, that whole area, you know, for a Black person to be able to move to Lehigh Avenue was like moving to Hollywood, literally. You know, it was a sense of pride. I bought a house, and, you know, and it was a sign of that things were going to be better. And you could see, although the streets that we went down, the houses were still, you know, people were holding on, you know, how long you can't say. So we got to 29th Street and we went down 29th Street, and the devastation is unbelievable. And while you don't see every dimension of it, you can imagine what it was like and what it is now. You see, because you see too much abandonment. And I said, well, it wasn't a church like this. It was formerly a movie theater. And, you know, that area, which we were then in, that's called Strawberry Mansion. Strawberry Mansion is near to Fairmount Park. It was mainly white people. And, you know, Black people were allowed to move into certain neighborhoods after white people moved out. But even then, most Black people felt a sense of pride. Everything, you know, we got secondhand. Everything. And still to this day, the new stuff, the better stuff is always for white people. And it's not just happenstance, it's intentional. But nonetheless, we move into neighborhoods and try to hold on, you know, and to have a house is, you know, just like dying and going to heaven. But then you see all the devastation. And where there were houses, you see these very cheap so-called strip malls, you know, a cheap imitation of what you would see in the suburbs, even a grotesque imitation. And then I showed her this church, as I was saying, which used to be a movie. And that's a lot of our churches used to be something else. Sometimes they used to be synagogues. Somehow they used to be a white church. Often, when you talk about the evangelical Pentecostalists, they used to be storefronts. That's what Baldwin writes about, storefronts. I don't think there's anybody or any group in this country where they've had storefront churches. You know what I'm saying? It's an interesting phenomenon. And that's just a parenthesis. See, if you don't think Black people are an oppressed group, an unfree group in this society, look at the ways that we are forced to live. No one else lives like this. So I showed her this movie, and it was a church, and it had been a church, and I know this church very, very well. And the woman that founded it and leads it, her name was Mother Dabney. I'm very sorry. Mother Dabney. And the name of the church is the Garden of Prayer. This says something about the people, that they need a mother, a matriarch. And the church is the Garden of Prayer. And we kept going down. I showed her where my uncle lived, and finally my grandmother, he turned it over to my grandmother to live there, and how my cousin came in and got on the pipe and burned the place down, and we drove around. And I didn't get to show her another church led by a woman named Sister Rosie Wallace. And the name of the church is the First Church of Faith, Hope, and Deliverance. I say all of this to demonstrate the cruelty of this ruling class. And I want to contrast this ultimately with the claims of the Democratic Party to be the party of Black freedom. And we'll come back, because we have to make this argument in these next 6 months, and I'm going to suggest a way. Then I took her to show her another church. It was, it was a beautiful day. I really appreciate Alice. And I have told y'all about Prophet Cherry. And so I took her by the church. And the church is where they moved in 1915. And they won't move from that place. It's not a church, it's two houses. And Prophet Cherry came out of the South. He was born in 1886, I think, or maybe earlier. 1886, he first established a ministry. And it is believed he is the first one to proclaim that the white man is the devil. And he said, and they are hated by God. This is ministry. And he claimed, and this is not, there's another church like this in Philadelphia, and there are other places. They don't call themselves Black Jews, they call themselves Hebrew Israelites. And they don't distinguish between Judaism and Christianity. And in this church, and it's named the Church of the Living God, the pillar ground of faith for all nations. And this all nations, this all inclusive thing is not unusual because Daddy Grace, who is also talked about in the book Black Gods of the Metropolis, his church is named the United House of Prayer for All People. Now, this is a profoundly segregated people who, in spite of everything, seek humanity. All talk, which is mainly performative, of class struggle, of trade unionism, and on and on and on, which does not address this question of this human suffering, are nothing but frauds. These people, in spite of everything, are the most advanced guard of the working class. There is no equivalent of them in this country, and probably in the world. How we will measure their historic contribution is yet to be decided. But they have to be put in a special place. And so, as we go forward in this year of Baldwin, and I have to ask you I have to apologize. James Baldwin and the agony of Black suffering. This is what we're talking about. When we say James Baldwin speaks to this time, what we're saying is James Baldwin speaks to suffering and the poor. He is their prophet. He is their spokesperson. Any other way of doing it is a fraud, a grotesque fraud carried out by ruling class that hates the poor. What we were looking at, Alice and I, was a genocide, one child at a time. These children know it. Because it is one child at a time, one teenager at a time, one would-be worker at a time, the murderers can deny it. They have plausible deniability. And in spite of it and in the face of it, claim that things are getting better. This is a reality unseen in human history. It is unknown. European sociologists and radicals come nowhere near understanding this. Their methodologies, their philosophical assumptions do not permit them to see this or to understand this type of suffering. Antonio Gramsci, in the early 1930s, presents the concept that the old is dying and the new cannot yet be born. And so in the meantime, there's an interregnum, a period between two periods. It is a very useful concept. But on its own and by itself, it doesn't do much for us in explaining this situation. Indeed, we are in an interregnum. But the case of Black people, it has always been an interregnum. The old has not died. The old is being held up as a part of the social system. It is not a matter of the old not being able to function anymore. Probably it can't function as it did. But the old system, and here's why the concept, the white supremacist social system, is so important. This system is the foundation and the support of the overall system of economics, military, foreign policy, and so on. You can't know this country sociologically or in any other way unless you can understand that this is a white supremacist social system. So the quote, laws of development of capitalism don't apply as they would, let us say, in Germany or England or even Russia. What we could say about the interregnum at this point is that the crisis is existential. More than that, we could say that, as well as all the things that everybody obviously speaks about, it is a civilizational crisis. But it is a civilizational crisis that hits at the very core of the white supremacist social system. Because the white supremacist social system grounds a civilization, a vast system of ideas, of beliefs, of habits, of laws, of ways of doing things, ways of thinking, and so on. Forces in the world are making it more difficult for the US empire to do whatever it wants. And that's what is meant by multipolar as opposed to unipolar world. You know? Yeah. But even all of that doesn't explain this. You know, I find myself sometimes becoming intellectually lazy as I listen to a lot of podcasts, which I'm gonna stop, by the way, because I done heard everybody and I'm tired of hearing the repeats of the same thing. You know what I'm talking about, Samir. So, but and they do all say the same thing. And they avoid asking the same questions. You're not saying nothing all that profound to say we're in a multipolar world. The US ain't what it used to be. The dollar is not what it was. Okay. But then what? Just saying it, that we're moving into a multipolar world does not suggest that the world forces that uphold multipolarity are necessarily anti-imperialist or anti-war. But certainly, the United States must perform its so-called hegemonic and necessary role in history in ways that it never had to in the last 80 years. But Baldwin gives life to the concept interregnum in a way that Antonio Gramsci never conceived or never could. And it's kind of the question that you asked, Jerry, last week about the system and the individual. In sociology, we call it the macro-micro link, the system and the individual. In sociology, to my knowledge, sociological theory, sociological research, no one conceptually or otherwise explains that link better than Baldwin. And this is crucial because the capacity of people to change is almost predicated upon their capacity to alter their relationship to the system itself. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? To rupture and reconfigure the macro micro link to no one has conceptualized it this way. Now, Raju and Nanditha bring it up, Raju and Meghna bring it out in their article somewhat, but we have to go deeper. To break the existing configuration of the micro, the individual to the system, is a question that Baldwin puts and develops in multiple ways. I don't want to go into it now. In fact, I don't know it as well as I wish I did. But you all, in your readings, know what I'm talking about. How he talks about the relationship of a system to the human heart. Which further validates our thinking and discourse about the revolutionary character of the philosophical and ideological move that Baldwin makes from the individual to the human being. That to break the link is to discover the human. And to discover the human in America is to discover the Black human being. In many ways, to discover the human in its fullest dimensions on a world scale is to discover the Black human being. But I'm just thinking that I could be wrong, and I don't want to exaggerate who we are. But there is no question in my mind that Black America is a world historic people. We'll come back to that. To get at Baldwin and what he's saying requires a complete, in fact, unmitigated attack upon postmodernist identity politics, queer identity politics, intersectionality, and the whole rest of that theoretical, philosophical, ideological architecture that has been imposed over the last 30 years. So as we go forward, we must be unafraid in taking on what is viewed as progressive and revolutionary and liberating and freeing in bourgeois discourse. I want to come back to that because this means then that our task in terms of the Democratic Party, see, because all of this, which I would say all of this garbage is collected in the Democratic Party and then kind of deodorized and sold to us as freeing and liberating. We will therefore have to explore new regions of theoretical thinking We shouldn't be afraid. And I'll tell you why we shouldn't be afraid, because what exists is so decrepit. It has almost discredited itself. You know, we have kind of followed on the internet many of the celebrations of the 100th anniversary of James Baldwin. None of them have impressed me, and none of them have attempted to do anything close to what we're attempting to do. We talked about the Schomburg, we talked about the Public Library of New York, we talked about the Smithsonian, we talked about the National African American Museum, all of them. None of them has really attempted to present James Baldwin as the great philosopher, intellectual, freedom fighter, revolutionary that he was. But I was struck recently by, I think last week, CBS's morning program. They did a 5-minute, it seems, piece on Baldwin, which was supposed to be a celebration of him. And, you know, while I looked at it, I said, oh my God, you know, because, you know, they can present everything to make even the worst thing look so good. You know, they went from the Smithsonian to the Schomburg, to, you know, and they had this, the commentator, he's so professional. And I know when we did the documentary, you know, I said to Crystal, I don't want to be the voice of it. I wish Morgan Freeman or somebody, but she said, no, Doc, your voice does it. But because, you know, because having been the voice of something, then you listening to other voices that are really professionals. But all Black people in high places in museum and library structures. So they're all paid well, and they're also happy, and they're also confident, and, you know, of course, they get that Hollywood teeth cleaning, so when they smile, it's like pearly whites. You know, the whole deal, the whole makeup thing. And I'm saying, oh shit, you know, can we ever compete with all of this? You know, and we do. And that's why, you know, we pay so much attention to our presentation. You know, even though we're amateurs, we got to be, because the propaganda comes in the most elegant package. So, but here it was, Baldwin, a figure of the past. Baldwin, who does not speak to this time, and certainly not to the poor. It was as though Baldwin never talked about suffering or children, you know, or war and peace, or capitalism. And so this is the Baldwin. And I'm certain that many of those in Philadelphia who, for their own reasons, try to boycott everything the free school does, will gobble that up with the quickness, because they're really intellectually lazy and political opportunists. I want to return to them. But in the end, Baldwin will not mean anything to a lot of people until he does. They will go everywhere until there's nowhere else to run or hide. And Baldwin, if we have anything to do with it, will still be here. And so we have to look, I guess, the Democratic Party. I want to begin with the Democratic Party convention and the so-called pro-Palestinian marches. as you know, about 10,000 people turned up. And that's not because it was not possible to get over 100,000, because we went to at least one march where there were over 100,000. And that was several months ago, and there have been others like it in Washington. There had been civil disobedience activity all over the country. And then, of course, the magnificence of the student encampments over 100 universities. But this march failed abysmally, but it was supposed to. It was not supposed to succeed because those organizing it did not want to damage the Biden-Harris campaign. And even the polls at this point show that the Palestinian question in the war in the Middle East is still a very important issue for the American voters. Over 100,000 people in Illinois and Michigan and Minnesota had voted non-committed. Chicago and the area around Detroit and Dearborn, the largest concentration of Palestinians. And they have a movement, Abandon Biden. With all of this, you couldn't get but 10,000 people? 200 organizations so-called supporting it, but we knew that most of them were frauds and just paper organizations anyway. But it was designed to fail. And then a group of hypocrites led on the ground in Chicago by the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. I know that name because I know that organization. I know who it's founded, and I know who leads it in Chicago, and I know what his politics are. We have to stop Biden because Trump is a fascist, you know what I'm saying? And then here comes the Communist Party. We're marching against genocide. And then, of course, Sean Fain of the UAW, we call for a ceasefire. Well, hold it, dog. If you're calling for ceasefire, call for cut off funds to Israel. You ain't really said nothing. And what you said is too little, too late. But it was designed to fail, which says a lot about what is the left. Martin Luther King said in his speech on why I oppose the war in Vietnam, I don't think in the version that he gave at Riverside, but in another version, he has a statement where he says, and God will raise up a power that does not even know his name to break the back of your power. He was saying, America, keep going down this road. God will raise up a nation that does not even know his name. Here he's talking then about the Soviet Union. We might even say China, but we might say a combination of nations. A power that does not even know his name. We could even say Trump, to break the back of your power. What King and Baldwin are saying is a profound political, philosophical understanding of the path towards revolutionary and democratic change in the United States. And what they are saying, and this is back to, the macro link. is that, in King's words, America, if you do not have a radical revolution of value, you will go down. And you will go down not just you at the hands of your own people. Let me go a little quickly. While the bourgeoisie, and I'm talking about the big capitalists, the oligarchs, quote, celebrate Baldwin, the left totally ignores him. Totally. And, you know, there are many explanations for it. You know, I would say at the core is white supremacy. It exposes the white supremacist racism of what is called the left. Right. Not a word. Not a word. But they overlook Baldwin at their own peril. The people will go beyond them. And if we can help the people go beyond them, we should do everything we can. They're hypocrites, scumbags, to put it another way. It's a fake left, performative left, trade union leaders that have no right to speak in the name of working people in the face of the almost unprecedented suffering in this country, and especially among Black people. And you see it right here in this city. Take the Saturday Fake School, who tried to use pictures of W.E.B. Du Bois to disguise who they really are. They could care less about Du Bois. When we had the showing of the documentary here, one of their members, who's kind of a friend, and I was castigating him for being fake. I was talking too loud about fake and a hypocrite and a perpetrator of a fraud. Now, on what authority did I have to do that? But you know, I have gangster tendencies at times. And he said, well, we're about abolitionist democracy. That's what Du Bois said. I said, yes, but he said something else. The revolutionary dictatorship of the Black proletariat. What about that? That's explored in at least 3 chapters and one major footnote in chapter 9. You understand? But see, here is the practice. See, if it was Marx, we have to have every word right, every T crossed, and every I dotted. But when it comes to a Black thinker, you know what I'm saying? Just anything you take from them is okay, because they ain't that profound anyway. And we all know, of course, that Marx said most that had to be said. And so as they put it, the father of American Marxists, which they don't even mean that. It's just virtue signaling, their way of saying, all of us white people up in here, we ain't racist because we acknowledge Du Bois. But the thing is, you quote acknowledge him, but you ain't never read him. Or as they will do in the Saturday Fake School, they will have a course on Black Reconstruction that will go on for 3 weeks. Yes. And then they will leave with a certificate, we know Black Reconstruction. Or as the Saturday Fake School did over at the Penn encampment, where a group of them, it turned out to be all white people, stood up holding copies of Black Reconstruction. Now, I mean, come on. Let's keep it 100. Who do you think you fool?
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think you playing with? You understand?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Last week, somebody put a comment on the in the chat. Why don't y'all have a debate? I think they said debate with Revolutionary Black Guy. And just my quick response was, that's child's play. And it is. It is. This is why I'm going to break my addiction to podcasts and to YouTube because it is it has become, and this revolutionary blackout is an example of it, a thing where people have nothing to say but can say it over and over again and loudly and arrogantly, you know, and then you'll get a lot of hits because you know how to work the algorithm or buy your way. You buy that your way into that, right, Samir? Into the algorithms and stuff. And so now you're an important person because you have so many hits.
Mm-hmm.
But that too will pass, as they say in the Bible. I'm going through the Bible. Right? Jerry, I got to go to you to be certain that my quotes are right. But then there's platypus. Every idea of any significance comes from Europe, modern Europe. And, even though the United States is a nation whose history centers upon the struggle of Black people and to resolve this great question of Black oppression, they claim that George Lukács, Herbert Marcuse, Horkheimer, and Adorno, the one whose name begins with an A, Adorno, that's how much I think of them, together or separately. Adorno's more important than Baldwin ever could be. Lukács, the philosopher of history, could teach Du Bois something, and on and on and on. A type of arrogance, and again, white supremacy, that even liberals and conservatives would shy away from. I'll just mention the name PSL. We don't need to go into them. They seem to be on a downward trajectory. They had a short run, got a lot of money. The Workers' World Party, again, just to mention the names, because they had no impact again. And again, I want to emphasize the 100th anniversary of Baldwin is not even mentioned by them. But they might come up and say, "Oh, you didn't see this in our newspaper." I guess I'd have to say, "No, I did."
Nobody does.
But
Nobody does.
yeah. But I get the overall spirit of y'all host, and I know how you roll, so it doesn't matter anyway. The various communist parties, including the Communist Party of the United States, who probably said something, but it's insignificant. The new American Communist Party, under the leadership of Hazel Den, the favorite of some people at a certain time. They're operating at such a high level of theory and research and ideology, and they feel the great urgency of advancing the proletarian struggle and all of that. They don't have time for Baldwin. Baldwin has nothing to say to them. two podcasters that I want to talk about just briefly that are my friends, and they might hear this and call me. I'm going to call them anyway next week. Wilma Leon and Garland Nixon. As you know, at one time, at least with Garland, I was on his podcast a couple of times, but he seemed to have become enthralled with the leader of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists. Very exotic sounding thing. A woman of Indian British descent. A white woman. And he told me he said, "Oh, you got to listen to her." I said, "Garland, don't you know 30 of my years of life, I was about that. I know that by heart. Might be new to you." And then Garland has suddenly become a follower of Caleb Maupin. I think they made a joint pledge to fight imperialism or something like that. Now, the reason I raise this to Garland, don't be asking me to come on your radio show or, for 10 minutes or whatever, which I always do. But then you're going to have all of these other people to explore things in their fullest. And I'm here with this preschool during the year of Baldwin. So now what we're going to have to do, we're going to have to cut all ties. Don't insult my intelligence. Because if you think you're going to do that, no, it's over. I never asked for no money or nothing like that. It's the general political education. And the same with Wilmer, a good man who contributed to the events here, the celebration, and we appreciate it. But I don't think Omali Yexatelli or Caleb Maupin or some of the other people I see on there have an analysis any better than what we do here. But anyway, you always ask me to come on your radio show for 10 minutes. But for the fuller articulation, you went somewhere else. Well, my point is, we'll stay there. I'm not seeking that kind of celebrity. And our work, in fact, as I will discuss, is not with people that listen to your podcast, but the people who don't listen to anybody and are not listened to by anybody. That's who I'm interested in. I only did your podcast because you asked me and you're my friend. Pardon me, your radio show because you asked me and I'm your friend. Your audience is not my audience. Right. Lastly, I want to say this. The free school is our common home. We are fortunate that our home is also a world house. Not many people have this opportunity. It gives us the ability to talk to and interact with the people. We must protect it with everything that we have. Not allow ourselves to stray from it. This is a home filled with love. It is our destiny. It is our identity. Without it, there's not very much to us, any of us. But with it, we have a great capacity. I don't know every Black person in Philadelphia, but I do know Black Philadelphia. I know the zeitgeist of Black Philadelphia. People, Black Philadelphia, I can't speak for white folk. Black Philadelphia went from being interested in us to beginning to love us and trust us. I saw it. Black Philadelphia is skeptical. We're not trusting because we've been betrayed so often by people who look like us and people who don't look like us. To have achieved this, I attribute it to you all. Really. You all have developed qualities, and people see it where they trust the free school. They don't quite understand it. You know, many people had heard of the free school before. And the free school used to look differently. As I told you, it was old, it was blacker, you know what I'm saying? And I had to find a way to understand, well, where did this free school come from? You know, really. But I think I have it now. I think I understand it. And I think that this free school, unlike the others, has been forged in a struggle and an identification with the Black poor. Although no one in the free school is Black, I guess maybe me and Serafina, are Black and poor. And so it's still being worked out, I think. But what brought us together? This was not supposed to be. And I said it to Kathy. I said, it is our destiny. Destiny brought us here. We were made for this and would not find happiness until we found it. So we go forward in these last 6 months. And I think we can do this. I really do. I think Baldwin is a weapon that heals. The poor, the working people, the young kids. That's why we have to work hard to get this West Philly thing straight. Hard. Not because we have to bring a commitment that the principal or most of the teachers don't have. You know? And they're not committed in that way. Everywhere, if we can get into Mother Dabney's Garden of Prayer, Sister Rosie Wallace's First Church of Faith, Hope and Deliverance, certainly Zion, who have treated us in a magnificent way. Hopefully, the Nation of Islam will see what we're trying to do and see how it is parallel and intersects with what they're trying to do in the community. Because, you know, really, I say this, Eddie, they have to understand there's more than one way to skin a cat. If you feel where I'm coming, it's not just y'all, it's y'all in alliance with others. You dig where I'm coming from? So we can do this. We must do this. No one else will do it. And we must not allow Baldwin to be trivialized and dragged through the mud and made into something he never was and never sought to be. Last but Baldwin lived 63 years, which is not a long time.
No, it's not.
I was saying to Eddie and Alice last night, we talking anyway, uh, and Baldwin is a man for all time. The Smithsonian want to make this into something, James Baldwin and queer resistance. For most people who have gone to universities and in that kind of environment, that's a beautiful thing. Oh, yeah. Oh, now I can live out my identity and all that, as though everything is about you. But what was the point? That's right. Oh, and I was saying to them, in free school, we've been working on this thing. And too often in these times, these postmodern times, love is reduced to sexuality and such. And I was saying to them, and I go into it more, I don't want to go into it now. But see, well, I'll go right there. See, this idea that Baldwin is a gay man, which meant that other gays were attracted to him. Only gay men were attracted to him. And he was only attracted to gay men. That's not true. Yeah. A man like Baldwin attracts women. I mean, heterosexual women, because he is a man of gentleness, of compassion. When people talk about romantic love, they talk, and I make this mistake, of sexual love. So, what is romance? What is attraction? And one of the things Baldwin, and I only speculate this, I have no firm evidence in his writing. Baldwin didn't have any children, but he loved all children. I think Baldwin sacrificed having children because he knew what he had to do. Right. I can imagine women like Nina Simone and Lorraine Hansberry were romantically in love with him. Easy, that ain't a hard thing to see. And any woman who realizes herself as a woman could easily be romantically attracted to Baldwin. And his romantic affairs didn't all have to be sexual. And I'll end it on this. If you look at Baldwin, there's pictures of him in his underwear, how skinny and he was. And even back in our days, we didn't think he was good looking. In fact, we thought he was the opposite of it. But then here, that smile. Yeah. If you want a lover, he's your man. Or something like him. Do you understand where I'm coming from? And I'm not saying that anybody won't, but I'm just saying it's not all of these, tough guys and whatever other kind of guys. Baldwin is the man. He is the role model of masculinity, what a man should be. And once that's resolved in our society, because everybody's looking, I say for men, I talk men now, looking for manhood. How do I be a man? You know what I'm saying? And usually it's a strong man, the man without feeling, the man who does not show the vulnerable, tender sides of himself. Baldwin shows you all that and shows you how to do it. So we got to cut through this queer shit. Yeah. That's a fraud.
Yeah.
It's a perpetration of a fraud if there ever was one. And they can come, the LGBTQs can come and beat me up and everything. I was hanging out with a cat. When I'm gonna end on this. When I get the bus down here, so in Broad, I have cats. Then, we get some conversations going, and so he was talking about, because this cat came up blowing his horn and all that racket.
Yeah.
And I said, man, chill, because some people got guns and stuff. He said, but I got my razor. So I said, man, I've been thinking about getting me one. I need one. Either that or get a license to carry. A straight razor. It's well known where just if you know how to use it, you can cut a cat up with a quickness. But then he said to me, I'm done this. I just got to tell this story. He said to me that he that on his block he had a friend that carried a ice pick.
Uh-huh.
See, an ice pick is more effective than a razor. Did you know that, Rhonda? Yeah, got an ice pick. And I said, man, shit. And so I said to him, I said, I'm gonna go get me an ice pick. Because in case somebody, the LGBTs or somebody try to step on me, he said, he discouraged. He said, look, man, don't get an ice pick. Because an ice pick is more, because see, once you hit a person with an ice pick, it goes deep into the organs. You knew about that, man? It's like death by 10 cuts. You hit them a couple times, they don't even know how they've been hit. But it was an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
So if the LGBTQs come to beat me up, I won't have to use my hands. I get me an ice pick. I'll end on that.
Or you can just misgender them. Yeah, just crumble.
I know, Paul, but you don't know nothing about no ice picks and all that.
Oh, I'm scared.
Can I say about what you said about we said a lot of things, but about Baldwin, what he represents, and obviously I think about the Nation of Islam a lot. In the beginning of the fire, next time he begins, letter to his nephew. But then in the second essay, he talks about the human suffering in Harlem, and I think it's become clear to me now, what Black Christianity really represents. It's the human urge to address everyone, the fundamental human condition of human suffering. We all suffer. And I was thinking about the blues, and I haven't read the uses of the blues, but in the context of someone who was raised in a Christian upbringing where God loves you so much that He sent His Son to die, his Son to die for you. He told Abraham, "Not your son, but mine." The blues makes more sense to me, and Baldwin makes more sense to me because it's that human suffering that connects us to other human beings, and we can't really love. Love is an adult emotion. When children are in love, it's puppy. It's superficial.
Why do you say that?
I think because you've said it before, but am I wrong? Okay. Well, it's not the same. It's not the same as the love that Jesus had for humanity. That's the love we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about romantic love or sentimental love, or childish love. You said at the end, men are interested in how do I become a man, but I find that women don't ask themselves this question. Why? I think that men are asking themselves questions. World War II, firearms has changed the power dynamics of women. It really doesn't matter so much if you're a strong man, but out of a sense of nostalgia, men look back, you know, but the real question is where do we go now? How does a man become a man now? What's the role model for that? I mean, to link it back to Baldwin, why don't people give him the respect he deserves when you're talking about, you know, Russian Hawkins?
Yes.
Why doesn't this exploration of the human condition, which is, you know, what every religion is about? You know, when I think about the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, and I think about, you know, sort of the lesson uh, about duty. You know, this is what the Nation of Islam would be. Our fundamental task is civilized. You know, man, for them, they need to be civilized. For Islam, there's pre-Islamic Arabia and Islamic Arabia, because Islam brought language to pre-Islamic Arabia. Language, but also this idea that you're not separated by tribe, but that every man is your brother. And the Nation of Islam continues that idea where, you know, Islam is a gift to humanity from God because it's civilization. And I think it's civilizing. I think the blues, this human urge to address the human condition, it's a transcendence. We're trying to transcend the condition. But spiritually, it comes first from an intrinsic internal thing, the human being.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whether it's Islam, you know, what you said, you began by talking about beauty. And I went to New York last weekend with my sister, and I talked to her about the Empire State Building, and I was like, which one's the Empire State Building? What's that building? What's that? Sorry, I'm not from New York, but she is now. And I said, oh, that's the World Trade Center. And I was like, I don't like the World Trade Center. It represents a world, it represents the 2000s. And it's a world where they didn't believe in anything. The Empire State Building, that represents all the ideas are encapsulated in the architecture. It's reflected back to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that. But those are the ideas of that time where they believed in something, they were building towards something, and they were building something beautiful. I think about this a lot. I've never had the chance to say it, but I think about the word soul as coming from the Latin anima, which means, you know, animation comes from this word. But it's what
It means what's that one more time?
it's anima means to move. It's related
Yes,
to the
yes.
word animation, but it's related. The soul is what drives them internally, because the brain isn't our internal drive. You know, our body is just our body. It's just flesh. It doesn't have something that you know, keeps it animated. What animates human beings is that's the part. You know, it's something that human beings have been talking about for a long time, and I think all those ideas are encapsulated in religion, but also that internal spirit, that life world, which is lived in its, you know, as you said, its full completeness in special areas, like the church, like schools, like women's organizations, civil organizations, communities. You know, I was talking to my coworkers, and I said, and he said, "Oh, I was really surprised that RFK and Trump won all those vegans." I told him, "Not surprised at all. Veganism is contains a lot of nihilism. You know, they basically believe that human beings can't eat animals, and anytime that we interact with the animal world or nature, that it's a negative thing. And so they don't believe in anything. So it predisposes you to nihilism. So as far as I'm concerned, veganism is a very individualistic philosophy. So for vegans and, you know, health plus, whatever you want to call them, whatever that weird coalition that Trump and RFK built with truckers and vegans and tree hugging hippies and all these, you know, white suburban women, all those communities who, you know, you said no one speaks to them. No one speaks to them, and they don't speak back. Um, that's the white community, but what about the black community?
And that's what I was talking about, the poor.
In
Yeah.
Philadelphia? Yeah, I mean, I remember the first time I saw Broad and Erie, and I'm from almost from Philadelphia, I'm from the suburbs, but I'd never seen that before the Eagles game? Why before the Eagles game you always see South Street? Why do you see cheesesteaks? Why do you see the art museum? These are all white areas of the city. Nobody ever explained to me, Broad and Erie. Nobody ever explained to me Germantown until I came to the preschool. And I've been searching for answers about, the world for a long time. And, I got really into Norman Finkelstein. I got really into, Glenn Greenwald and The Intercept and obviously all the podcasters that you mentioned. I had a libertarian streak and I was interested in Aaron Schwartz, who gave his life against MIT. And I know that, Noam Chomsky never really stood up for him. And, Noam Chomsky defended MIT after Aaron Schwartz committed suicide from, the aggressive prosecution. But anyway, these are all just names, everybody is, but nobody has answers. Caleb Maupin, Haas, nobody really has the answers like we do in the preschool.
Samir, can I just interrupt? Can I just say one thing, if you don't mind? And then I don't want you to stop, but just one thing that I've forgotten reminded me of it. I wanted to talk about the Democratic Party and its claim to be the party of Black freedom in the face of the devastation brought about at this stage of crisis by the white supremacists. I just wanted to say that because I think I forgot to include it when I spoke, but let's keep that on our minds because that's going to be some heavy lifting we have to do going forward. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke for a while because it's just this long thought train that I had. But what I mean to say is I'm done reading, reading newspapers, podcasts, Financial Times, The Intercept, New York Times, Philadelphia Inquirer. I've read them all. And, quite frankly, the only one that I really give a damn about right now is The Final Call. And, nobody has the answers in this time of crisis. But it's only until I came to the Saturday preschool and I learned, but someone does. You have heard of them. They've just been slandered. It's, Du Bois, King, and Baldwin. And yeah, I mean, when we read Baldwin during the reading groups, it's really our time during the week, but we're just like, oh, this is real. This is real life. This is something that clarifies, that doesn't confuse. And it reminds me of the end of Another Country, where Vivaldo sees. I've still been thinking about the end of Another Country because what happens to Vivaldo, where this incredibly sad thing happens to him, something that should rip him apart as a man, but he can finish his novel. But he can see the world more clearly. Baldwin says that. He sees reality for what it is for the first time. And so, I guess for me personally, my journey through preschool, to speak autobiography, I've always been searching for something that is the closest to real life, something that clarifies my situation, clarifies my role as a man. And I think that more than ever, the forces of misclarity have been revealed. Now I'm asking, why didn't, my professors tell me about this? My professors had studied so long. If I had met so many smart people, what's going on that they, if I'm reading the best newspaper. But anyway, I agree with your sentiment a lot about, I'm pretty done with mainstream podcasts, newspapers, the news. I told my coworkers, we're not going to play the news anymore in the office. I'm tired of it before the election.
I think it's just somewhat related to what Samir was saying about the soul, but I think the redefining of James Baldwin that you started with, which is James Baldwin in the agony of Black suffering, and specifying him not just as prophet, but prophet for the poor. like of the poor, for the poor, is really significant because something, especially starting with the DNC online event from last week, that became very clear is we're not just addressing actually the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party, but by addressing the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party, we're essentially clarifying what Baldwin would call the evidence of things not seen.
Yes.
Because see, like the evidence of things not seen is the suffering of Black people. And there are two questions within that, which is why is it not seen? Why is the evidence? Why do people refuse to see the evidence? And then what is the evidence of? And for one, okay, let's start with what is Black suffering evidence of? It's evidence of an unfree society, an unfree people, which means not just Black people are not free, but it asks you a question as a human being in the society. If Black people are not free, if there is this devastation, does that mean you are free? And then what does that mean in terms of your role as a person in a society? I feel like that in some ways was something you said, Doc, when we were reflecting on the 3-day birthday celebration of Baldwin and what we did achieve, which is to say, if you can get the chronology right, which is, and then, okay, I'll say a different way how to describe the chronology, but if you can get the chronology right, which is everything today and what we inherit in the unfinished struggle, like democratic emancipatory struggle to achieve our nation, starts with the anti-slavery struggle, then it clarifies the American people's world historic task and this great responsibility that people can choose and to take up, which is to achieve our nation. It shows you there's something unfinished. And that unfinished task also describes to you why, maybe as a child, things didn't seem so right after all. And so the evidence of things, and then the reason why I think this is Baldwin's whole work, which is there's a reason why people do not want to see the evidence of things not seen. And it's because there's this white supremacist social system, which I guess is what was raised in terms of the individual's relationship to society, is the white supremacist social system trains you to, even if you see the evidence, to no longer even see it as evidence, right? It's the way people become I think Eddie talked about it in the last free school where like there's a way in which you could live, let's say in South Philly, as a child and grow up, but you become trained to think that it's maybe as a child you see the devastation of people drinking during the day, nowhere to go, like homelessness, drugs, and you think to yourself, this is wrong. As a child, you say, this is wrong. How can this be? Why is no one doing anything? But then as you grow up, you're trained to say, well, maybe the people who did it, the reason why they are the way they are is because they're inferior, or because they don't work hard enough, or because they're lazy. And so you're just desensitized to the suffering. And that's the white supremacist social system at work. And so that's just one thing I want to say, because I also think, I just think there's something very key about being able to first see that we are not free. Like this unfulfilled task of democracy. Because if there is such, like Baldwin says at the end of the Fire Next Time, which Samir brought up, where Baldwin asks, what will happen to all this beauty? He's talking about both Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, who just like King, not so differently, are committed to the freedom of their people, to this unfulfilled task, the emancipation of the American people. Baldwin is asking, what will happen to all this beauty, Black people, the poor, the suffering, but then also how Black people have no choice but to struggle, to enter battle. And I mean, and I also wanted to bring up that's what I think that CBS story was trying to do. Like all these celebrations of Baldwin, they want to keep him in the past because they want to insist that what Baldwin is talking about, Black suffering, is in the past and we've done something about it. So if you can keep Baldwin in the past, it's also a way of saying we solved extreme Black suffering. We solved lynching, we solved segregation.
That's the Democratic Party.
Yes, and that's the Democratic Party. No, that's really important because the whole point of the Democratic Party is to say we are evidence. We, the Democratic Party, are evidence of an achievement of something, which is we are the party of achieving racial equality. We supported the 1967 voting rights bill. we did this, blah, blah, blah. Like, and here are all these Black people like Oprah who are evidence that Black people are free. Why? Because she's a billionaire, despite the fact that we're not talking about Oprah, we're talking about the Black poor. And not even the Black poor, but let's just talk about the poor, which means you have to talk about war as well. But yeah, I just want to make that point where I think that's also why Baldwin has to, that's why like people's celebrations want to insist that Baldwin speaks to a past. When we're saying that Baldwin speaks about an interregnum that Black people have lived in already, like I like the way you basically said that at the beginning where you said, it has always been an interregnum for Black people. Like it has always been an interregnum. There has always been something old and the possibility of something new. And so in some ways, I actually felt when I heard that, it actually kind of clarified. I don't know if I'm hearing you correctly, Doc, because I think when you see actually, to me, this whole time, I was like, oh, these past 10 years are interregnum. But actually to see, starting with the anti-slavery struggle, Black people have always known this is an interregnum.
Well, I would say
Yeah.
the defeat of Reconstruction.
Okay.
And it's almost like a long interregnum.
Yeah.
I
Interesting.
would just put it that way. Okay.
Yeah, well, I just think that's significant to say it's a long interregnum because it also clarifies what we mean by the crisis. Because really the crisis is that there are people, the ruling elite, but maybe, you know, other people who are holding on to the old, which is the white supremacist social
Can I just
system.
suggest something, how we understand poverty and Black poverty?
Yeah.
Because it is, I think, a deeper, more prolonged poverty. In other words, if you take, let's take the end of Reconstruction, there are generations, families that have never known anything but poverty. It's not like we just got poor, we always been poor. You know what I'm saying? The other thing is that when you layer on top of that the legal constraints upon Black people legally getting, I mean, the legal path to opportunity getting out of poverty. I just want to put one thing before you. The famous or infamous Plessy v. Ferguson decision of 1896. It's not well understood what that decision, Supreme Court decision said. What it said, in the face of the struggle for racial equality, that whiteness is a protected category. In other words, the Supreme Court said that the Constitution, as they understood it, protects white privilege wherever it manifests. The white poor, the white worker, the white bourgeois. See, but whiteness as such is protected by the law of the country, which means then that if a state says that they don't want Black people to vote, or Black people shouldn't vote because we're going to have tests to prove that they're not intellectually up to it, or that whatever. What the Supreme Court was saying was that is legal because it is done with the intent to protect whiteness, by which we mean white privilege. The man that brought the case from Louisiana, his name was Plessy Ferguson. Ferguson was a very light-skinned Black man. And in Louisiana, it was not like, let's say, Georgia or South Carolina, where you were Black or white. In Louisiana, they had more like the French style, where you'd have octoroons, quadroons, these different levels of close to being white. You know what I'm saying? Now, Plessy was a very light-skinned Black man who was passing for white. You see what I'm saying? Who passed for white. And therefore, when they got, laws, I think in New Orleans, where Black people had to sit in the back of the trolley or the bus. He contested it legally. And he said, and these are his words, to deny me whiteness is to deny me property. And by property, he meant privilege, access, really equality. To deny me whiteness is to deny me the opportunity to be equal. Because he had been kind of living, there were Black people in New Orleans who lived as white people, black and white, but in that in between. And hence, yes, poverty, but this legacy of unbroken poverty, generation, I mean, not just, I mean, families, you see these families like in North Philly and all that, poor, ain't nobody in their family ever been anything but poor. Like the young kids that Alice is talking to. I want to read Baldwin because I don't want to die. I mean, in this, he's not just expressing the immediate, but something deeper and longer. I would say, in the Baldwinian sense, it is the Black that are the key to everything. See, a lot of in Black life, it's a thing now where we believe the Black elite, the Black celebrity, the Black politician is the driving force because why? Because they're at the table with the white man. They close up on the white man. The white man authorizes them. So then we're told, well, look to our leaders, you know. And if I'm talking too much, you know, like you get MSNBC, there's a show called Morning Joe, Joe Scarborough. One of the key cats on there is Al Sharpton. Well, anyway, and the thing is, we're all supposed to look to him because he's the one that meets with Kamala Harris, and I met with Joe Biden, and that's all and that type of thing. But what we're saying is that it is the poor, and it really is. And I think we have to see them in this city. And, you know, just like Al and I, we went around, we could organize this, but you have to see it, you have to know it. The reason I'm saying this also, like I mentioned those churches, the churches are the fundamental organization structure of Black life, Black political life, Black cultural life, every singer, everything comes out of the church. You know, every politician, every civil rights leader for the most part. The Black poor have produced what poor people maybe nowhere else in the world have produced. That's why I said, I'm gonna show it to you. Mother Dabney. Mother Dabney, a mother to people who needed a mother. Not just a physical, not just your mother, but someone who would embrace you, love you unconditionally. That's Mother. And you can come and worship where? In the garden of prayer. The Black poor are cultural, civilizing force in this society. That's why I would say, you know, that's where I would articulate it. But it's not to be indifferent to poverty in general, but to understand that it's kind of, you know, I mean, I don't mean to be over. Black folk have been on something that looks like a death march. Death march. It's And the ruling class has, I mean, when it comes to us, they spared nothing. That's why they overturned the great culture, the music. This hip hop ain't no, this ain't shit. And you're gonna throw that at us, and this is what's happening now. How's that what's happening? And then I'm very disappointed, Patty LaBelle and Stevie going up in that bullshit. I am very disappointed. And if I got a chance to tell, I would tell them, you didn't belong there. But anyway, that's a whole nother question. But you see the point that I'm making.
Right.
What I want to say is that what's not being identified is all of this. And that's what you see. You're being dishonest. The United States, you see it. You know, you talk about that voice. China's economy is significantly larger than the United States. Yeah. And this year will West, the five eyes, those countries, the Western countries, will they let the rest of the world live in at the center of
The Five Eyes again.
United States, it's Canada, it's Australia, it's New Zealand, it's English-speaking countries, and Israel. That's the global 60% of global manufacturing. Put it this way. United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, their total manufacturing capacity is only 10%.
Well, can I jump in? I'm finished.
It's been that way. It's wrong. The West is still trying. And I think that's what you're saying. Both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans are something. The Americans, the only thing that they because in destroying black people, they destroy themselves. They don't realize in destroying me, you destroy everything. And it hasn't gone.
Let me let Alice, and then you come back, because she wanted to say something, and then you go through
And I think, well, I think that's why at the free school, we have such an emphasis on people, what the people will do in a moment of crisis. Because there's a question of, the ruling elite, their psychology, their war-making policies. But I think that's why we have so much of an emphasis on the people, because many of us in the free school, we have family from China, and we're also very proud that the people that we come from are able to lift themselves out of poverty. But I think a big question, and I mean, we talk about economics as part of the overall social system, the civilization, but that's only a piece of it. Because I think many of us who go to China actually realize that despite their advancements, there's also things that they have to figure out in this moment. Like this question, and Emily and I were talking about it this morning, which is the question of materialism, the question of, a country that has developed so rapidly, what does it do to the psychology of its youth? It's, super competitive. And there is a materialism. There's sometimes, I mean, we don't know all the Chinese people, and we know, I think, America better than China. But there is a question of the youth, which is, are they striving for higher ideals, purpose? Man was made for God. And that's important because I think it's by seeing the reality of not all Chinese people, but a good portion of it, that you realize that why is it that we say someone like King, someone like Baldwin are world historic figures? You know, Black people in a time when the United States was so economically developed, they were saying actually, despite the technological economic development of this country, something that's just as important is the moral dimension, the spiritual dimension. And I think that's why it's despite Tony was saying at the beginning, all of these commentators are speaking about, the US in decline, the West in decline, the dollar. There's something that they miss, which is what are ordinary people thinking and what is buried within ordinary people. And I say that because I think many of us are also learning what that means. Like many of us here were, came out of these universities, these quote unquote prestigious universities. We're not meant to see a lot of this. But it is through our experiences in Philadelphia and through the year of Baldwin speaking to students. Earlier you spoke about Mike. He's so brilliant. And actually, he's so brilliant that I've come to see how a figure like King and Baldwin can emerge out of people. And I get worried about Mike because there's a lot that's going on in his life, and that's why I think the social system is so important, where it is a lot of poverty, but what does poverty mean? It's not just the inability to get a job, but what does the impact of not having a job have on the family as well? And he's so brilliant, but it is true. Part of me wonders if he is going to die in the society, a spiritual and also physical death. And those are questions that I don't think China has had to face, like go ahead.
So I never see for example. What I say is in China, almost the world is a do-over. We have a real chance to make the world different.
Can I just say something? This is very interesting, just because I think you two it's a very interesting conversation, because I know what she said. Let me just ask it this way. Could I just repose your point? She is saying, see, they speak Chinese, they go back and forth to China. And everybody, in the past, material, all the economic achievement could be sacrificed by the spiritual emptiness. Is that fair way
And essentially, is that actually there's something that China and the rest of the world have from Black America. On. And I think that's
That human spirit that you're talking about,
Yeah.
I see it expressed in itself. What people do. want to go to Mexico because the indigenous people are severe conflict. But you see in the midst of the struggle, the humanity, you see family, in spite of the struggle. What I'm saying about China is that China and Russia, and I think we make the world, they want, they're the ones that snap the neck tomorrow. And so then it's up to the people of the world to remake the world.
Mhm.
It's clear that
Yeah.
it should be.
That's right. And this is, yeah, I think we're on this, but let me let Portable come in because, see, I think if I could just say, yeah, that, and that, see, but they'll say the same thing
Michelle? I'm kidding.
that she said.
Right. Well, I wanted to go back to this question of, I mean, I think it's important, Doc, to be reminded in the year of Baldwin what the year of Baldwin really is about, because I mean, yes, it's important to understand Baldwin, to understand the subtlety of language and theory, but then to always remember that at the heart of the year of Baldwin is this suffering that we are trying to deal with, to see, but then also to try and formulate a way out. And Baldwin does that. Baldwin has something to say to that question in this moment. And it also reminded me of something you had said. I mean, I think first of all, remembering that that is why we do all of this is first and foremost humbling, because it's almost like then it clarifies that what we are trying to do is to understand Baldwin so that we can be messengers to the people and take that. But then it also reminded me of something you had said at it was either at the time that we screened the documentary or in our debrief in free school, where you said that what the documentary tries to achieve in relocating Baldwin as inseparable from King, inseparable from the Black freedom movement, and inseparable from this question of substantive freedom in the country, which starts with the freedom of Black men. What it does is it clarifies for Black people in this moment what their historic role has always been and what it can be in this moment.
Right.
So it's like a way to bring back, Black people as a vanguard of the revolutionary struggle going forward, which is completely missing in this point. And in this this is the context in which I think we also view what the Democratic Party is trying to do in its posturing about how it is the party of Black people, because what it is telling Black people is that your role is, identity politics. Your role is to think of Black people not as a political revolutionary force, but as an identity category that has to struggle for certain narrow rights and narrow cultural agenda, And this is why what we are doing here with the documentary and all these discussions gives life to what the Democratic Party is trying to do, because the question is to address that suffering
That's right.
that you
That's
see all over Philadelphia. And the one last thing I'll say is just to give an example of what Baldwin is trying to tell Black people. It's what he says to his 14-year-old nephew, is that it's not about white people accepting you. That's not what the struggle is. The struggle is for you to accept white people and to show them what loving really means, what being able to love, that kind of love that can actually heal and transform a suffering society. You have to show white America what that looks like.
Yeah.
And
I think Michelle.
Okay. Well, I wanted to build on this because I think that the remarks you gave, the way I interpret it is like basically clarifying and reassessing what the criteria, both the criteria and the objective of the year of Baldwin is and how it's changing. And I think the importance of that can't be underestimated. And I appreciate that, what you're giving is an assessment of the first 6 months. and what that tells us about the task for the next 6 months and what it can be if we can raise ourselves to that level. And related to purpose, I think like our conversation is giving me almost like a new architecture to understand the year of Baldwin through. And one of them is basically, I feel like what we're putting forth is what is the Baldwinian, like what is Baldwin's method of struggle for this time? For yes, the period of crisis, but now to be more specific, the interregnum and how we move from one side of the interregnum to the other, where the old will die and the new will be born. And I feel like what you established today is the centrality of seeing in the concrete is key of like how the Black poor see the world, and you can see it concretely in Black suffering in a city like Philadelphia. But in regards to this method, I think the way that I'm starting to think about it, and this is also because of what you had said, is that what is needed is an intervention in the relationship between the individual and the system in the society. And I think this is the work that we've been doing through our events, through something like the documentary. Like Perba mentioned, I think just the project of the year of James Baldwin as undertaken by the preschool itself does expose the fraud of like these nonprofits, these institutions, the Democratic Party. And actually this conversation is like deepening my understanding of the contribution of the year of Baldwin as well. Like just to do what we're doing is like that. I think that is the strongest exposure of the deep hypocrisy and the deep like fraudulence of the ruling class's claim that this is quote unquote what the Black freedom movement is. But I think to finish the point about like this idea of an intervention and how it must be an ideological one, like I'm reinterpreting our work with, let's say, the documentary, what we saw with the exhibition and the way it engaged like the people who were present at the library, our reading groups. It's an intervention because what we are arming people with is an ability to see the evidence, which is the evidence of this crisis as seen in the agony of Black folk in particular, and then to establish it as such. But like that, it is evidence. It's evidence of something. But I think maybe the last thing I want to say is that increasingly I'm seeing that James Baldwin he really is the shape of the Black freedom movement in this time. Yeah.
Can I just make one point building off
I'm
of?
sorry, it's my mind. That's my.
No, that's okay. Oh my God.
Not so much as about.
No, I think, I guess what I wasn't clear about before is I agree with you,
Right.
Joe, which is that, yes, like even in China, there are differences between like the city that my family's from, it's rapidly developed, it's becoming wealthier. And yes, there's more of a problem with its materialism. And when you go to areas that are less developed, there's more of that human spirit where, you know, people are still more humble, they're not striving for that. But it's not just oppression that makes them the same as the Black poor here. I think it is that history of struggle and striving specific to the Black freedom struggle, where like, let's say that Western area that's poor in China that I'd gone to, I don't think in their minds, they're thinking about what's going on in Africa or what's going on in, I don't know, other parts of the world. But because of King and because of the Black freedom struggle here in America, there's something about both American or just the average American and Black Americans that is always reaching out to the world for ways of freedom, like looking to Gandhi, looking to I don't know, like Islam, looking to all of these different methods, and that's what connects both America and the Black proletariat to the world. Whereas something like in China, it's just not, because of their history of struggle, it hasn't been that the ordinary people are looking elsewhere
This is.
in the same way. No, go ahead.
No, can I just say something to support what you're saying? And it is I mean, we're being forced, and I agree with Michelle, that this year, Baldwin is forcing us, and we hope others, to rethink just what we mean by the Black freedom movement
Right.
and Black folk. And I think I this I put it like this: are Black people a world historic force? I think this is what Alice is saying. Well, that's something we should discuss, but certainly for Black people to play their historic role, we have to challenge the Democratic Party's claim that they represent the Black freedom movement. That has to be challenged with all that we have. That's, but I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Alice, but please continue.
Yeah, I think that's the point that I was gonna make, which is like, yeah, there is something about poverty, like the world over, but there's something unique about African Americans in this country, specifically through King, through Baldwin, where they're always connecting poverty at home to the situation.
And you say when you go to China, the poor don't think these.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the path to development where it's not just, I mean, China's very there's something about America that has brought people from various places throughout the world to this country. And I guess you can build on it too.
No,
Samir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I interject?
Go.
There's a difference between escaping poverty and fighting for freedom. No. Because I think that a lot of go-to tendency is, or like, when somebody used to grow up in a house that now is a lot, like, I think that person would want to escape, but the question of freedom is still on the table to resolve that creates that poverty in the first place. And it's a matter of like the quality of the people, more than poverty in of itself, which is why you suggested the defeat of Reconstruction, or like why you pointed out the period from the defeat of Reconstruction.
The long interregnum.
Right.
And I think that's a useful thing. A long interregnum, not just a short one. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, but I only say that to say is because there's like something that we're pointing out about the relationship of a Black people to this white supremacist social system, and how Black people see that relationship.
That's the difference. I think, there's never been a white supremacist social system in China, not even a Mandarin supremacist social system. But certainly, and then Emily again.
No, it's just a matter of what impulses, like you said, Samir, what impulses the people to move. And the fight is for freedom. And to achieve freedom.
That's Baldwin's central category.
To achieve freedom would also mean, yes, an eradication of poverty and alleviation of education, for it to be a proper education, for there to be healthcare and care for old people, for there to be systems of the state that work and benefit for the people, whether that be in transportation technology or water systems or the housing complexes or the fire departments, the legal departments, all of it, for it to work for the benefit of the people. But I do also see that there is a problem with the alleviation of poverty, or as a category to fight for, than to resolve freedom. Because I think people would rather alleviate the issues of the legal systems or the education systems or the tax systems, tax breaks, or social, all that before achieving freedom. And I think that's the quality that regardless of really where you are in whatever city that you're in, Black people would have or are trying, or actually like, I'm trying to point out the quality of behavior that exhibits itself in this, what you had mentioned as an interregnum, since the speed of Reconstruction, or the lack of achievement of freedom, which is what the whole purpose of the anti-slavery movement was about. And so that's why there's a difference.
As a Black American, it's that you free to do what white people do.
Right.
Everybody else. Because one of the things that Black people have fought for is to be part of this inclusiveness of the empire. Okay? And we going to the military, whatever our pursuits were, we wanted to be full strike, blue blooded, America. We wanted to be.
I don't think that's true.
Well, I think there's a battle. That's why two boys.
But that's not Baldwin. That's not thing, you know.
So,
Mhm.
you look at, you know,
Right.
at the
Oh,
time,
yeah.
same.
Oh, yeah.
The limited Black people are facing right now, even after slavery. I mean, I was alive to this. They want to go to amusement parks, they want to do gun zones, they want to go to the military, they want to move up to the military, because once you're in the military, you're restricted to clean the training. And they said, no, we can do more. And they proved that Tuskegee Airmen was the ventilation that we can be part of the end. We helped to defeat Germany. And that great defeat. And we, Black Americans, admitted, but some of a large portion of us want to be part of the end.
Can we-
And just want
can I say
more
something?
participation
Yeah.
than what we have.
No, no.
Okay,
I-
go ahead,
no,
Sarah.
okay, like,
Sarah,
for
yeah,
example,
yeah.
like, I'm an artist, so, you know what I mean? And there's plenty of people who want to do that. And it's a matter of where you're expressing from, for what do you express?
Right.
Meaning, why does it matter at all? You know, if I am able to articulate something that the people or people like, as opposed to something that Kamala Harris can sponsor, very simply, like literally. And I think I'm saying that because I think the aspiration of any so-called artist would be an expression of the qualities that people take up, which is in this case freedom, and not to be rich, you know. And I think that difference is made clear, or why the difference is important, is because I don't think we have time. I don't think we can manage people who work against, or like I think
Yes.
to say it
I'm
simply,
feeling-
like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
That's why the poor are so important.
Yeah.
For the very reason, because, go ahead, God, I'm sorry.
we already talked about Mike. You could talk about Susie, or like, I saw a friend of mine at K&A and I'm like, why are you down here? You know what I'm saying? And he's like, and it was like a situation. It's like a thing, like, dang, like, but at the end of the day, though, you have all of these people. And why is it just so hard not to care? You know what I'm saying?
Maybe for me, Black people, by and large, wanted to fight World War I, wanted to fight World War II, because they wanted to be part of the empire.
Yeah. Right.
Not necessarily.
Let's see. I'm saying from communists to now, okay? One, that's the reason why, in fact, you even said it, that if we fight in World War I, we fight in World War II, when we come back,
But can I tell you something though? Like, I could be your child, you know what I'm saying? Like, why don't I care about Black people? Like, why don't I care about that North Philadelphia family where you come from, or the North Philadelphia family that I come from? Like, why? And the problem that emerges from that is a very large disconnect from any real responsibility that gives any moral authority to anything that we do at all. And to be honest, your cousins, my cousins really don't care because they care about freedom. And if that is not being achieved by me, it will be achieved, period. And that's the point. That's the
Hold on,
point.
Joe. But go, and then I'm gonna let if I can let Emily and then and Eddie and then Samir. But go finish your point.
Meaning like whether you think it's gonna happen or like freedom will be achieved in my lifetime or not. The point is that there's really nothing else to really work on. And Black people know that, which is irregardless if you get a job at City Hall or fight in the war or, you know what I mean, speak 10 languages. The point is what you do with it. The point is how you care enough to build something with what we have, even if it's nothing.
Let me, Emily, you want to go quickly, and then Eddie, and then Samir, and then Pooh.
Well, I wanted to go back to, well, because I feel like what Serafine and Joe are discussing, plus what Alice brought up with Joe is, I just wanted to clarify something, at least what I think, which is, I think, like, let's say China, what Joe's bringing up about how China is challenging America, like the ruling elite of America, is actually significant in terms of saying that, yes, the rise of Asia, for example, is challenging the ruling elite, is making the ruling elite weaker to do whatever they want, including to their own people. So that's I feel like that's what you're saying, Joe, which I think we all agree with. But I think something, Doc, you said earlier, which stuck with me, was okay, but even if we have a multipolar world, does not guarantee, sure, a multipolar world might allow the rise of Asia, even the rise of Africa. But what about the Black people in America? That does not guarantee anything about the ruling elite, whether they'll die easily. And it also does not guarantee anything about the future of the American people, in particular, like the Black poor, the American people as a whole, children. And so that becomes that, and that is not just an American democratic or revolutionary question. That is actually, in fact, a revolutionary question for the whole world to speak for. And I feel like that's how I see it. The reason why I think that's important is because, like, a lot of people will say, well, the solution, I think this is what Alice is saying, which is the solution to this ruling elite in this country, horrific, like terrorists, will take down whoever they need to take down to desperately hold on something that's already dead, is the solution to this ruling elite or defeating the ruling elite will not come from a multipolar world. It has to come from the American people transforming themselves in the nation. That is an essential, that is a democratic revolutionary question and struggle that has ramifications for all of humanity. Because what it does is, it's not even talking about this ruling elite, this generation or cohort of ruling elite. It gets at a fundamental human question, like question of humanity, which is the white supremacist social system. Like, and that's what Serafina is also saying. It gets at the very roots of, well, why was this ruling elite created? How did it last for so long in the first place? Who allowed it to last in the first place? What system allowed it to last for so long in the first place? The long interregnum. And so, and I think that's why Alice is basically also saying that's what makes, and also Serafina, that's what makes, in particular, going back to, let's say, China and Asia and the world, that's what makes the Black proletariat, the African American people, a world historic force. And speaking of the documentary, it also what explains, like,
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah,
No. See, this question, the way Alice places it, that China has achieved it. Oh,
Yeah, I got you.
okay, all right, yeah. That China has achieved a great deal. But for China to go forward, it needs more than what China has right now. And that's what she says, the Black people.
right.
Is that a fair?
Yeah, well,
And this is what is I think this is an extraordinary claim. I think this is a claim that we should go forward with. That, you know, because, you look at a podcast, everybody's a geopolitical analyst these days, but
As long as it's a
nothing about the people, and certainly nothing about the American people, and nothing about, yeah. Go ahead, and then Eddie.
I guess just one clarification I want to make is I have no doubts that Xi Jinping maybe, and even parts of the Communist Party of China do see Africa, do see, in fact, even the crisis in America. The question is, do they understand the significance of, in particular, black people in the American democratic struggle? But I just want to raise that as like a clear.
I don't think so.
Yeah, and like I do think
And I think Mao and them may have understood it better than Xi Jinping and them.
right. Well, that's a big question.
But
Because,
go ahead,
well, I guess I'm just raising this because, like, I do consider my parents, for example, to be primary evidence of a specific time period of China. Like, whether they like it or not, they're just so obviously children of the Chinese Revolution. And to me, it's just very important to raise, even though they both told me, like, don't tell free school what we say in private. Because I can't help it, which is, like, I showed them the Baldwin documentary, and okay, like, it is incredible. At this point, I had accused my parents of being elitist and like white, like assimilating to whiteness, which is like very rude of me. But like, I just get very frustrated by what I feel like I know and they don't. But then when they watch that Baldwin documentary, I realize it's because they are children of the Chinese Revolution, children of Mao, and despite how much they resent Mao, that makes them look at that documentary and the anti-slavery struggle, like generation after generation, Emmett Till's mother, generation after generation of Black people in this country, not just transforming the country for themselves, but for everyone in the country. My parents, they immediately watched that and they resonated with it, to the point that we watched, and then my dad went to Chicago for a wedding, and his taxi driver was Palestinian. And the Palestinian taxi driver said, I don't think there's going to be a Palestine anymore. I've given up hope. It's too late. And my dad said to him, he's like, so naively, he was like, have you heard of a man named Martin Luther King Jr.? And he said, because I want you to know that my daughter told me about this man named Martin Luther King Jr. And there's a movement called the Civil Rights Movement in this country that no one believed in. And it took them to like change the opinion of like so many people that the country was changed. And I'm just telling you this because I think if they can do it, then you can do it too. And like my dad was saying that to the taxi driver, and he's basically saying, he didn't say, let me tell you about a man named Mao Zedong and like on the Long March who transformed the country and I can give you hope. He said, like, let me tell you about a man named Martin Luther King, and that's like, it's evidence of something universal. And yeah, and it really, and I don't know if it's, obviously, I know it's not just simply because he's Chinese and like he sees Black people, but it has to do with also him being in this country, and then producing me and you and Kathy, like, all of us, but like that generation producing us. But I just say this because I do think, yeah, I mean, what you're saying is true, but also I think that I cannot doubt that there must be people actually even better than my dad in China who see it.
Interesting. Go ahead, Ed.
I don't want to take away from this train, but when you explain the crisis of the white American social system politically with the Democratic Party, and then just the human devastation that we have to face, I think of, how are we going to live within this? How do I want to orient myself with this? And, one of my answers, like I think many people, is, I want to go to mosque. And, being there at mosque, is, first of all, the way they greet you, welcome beloved, welcome home. And, and there's a lot of young people there as a late who I imagine can be too different from your beautiful student, Michael. know, some of these, one of these young guys, you know, he like kind of misbehaves, to be honest, and you know, which is a reflection of, I think, things that he's going through that he doesn't know how to deal with. And like in any other place, I imagine that a young black man like him, they would throw him out. They would try to make an example of him, and they at best wouldn't want to deal with him. At worst, would punish him. Uh, they're trying to educate and lovingly correct this young man in his misbehavior. And you know, this is not like a question of like kindness. I think it's love in the most transformative, redeeming way possible. And so when I think about like the crisis of like the white social system and what it means to, I guess, reach towards and try to immerse myself in a black social system, I think of it as like, how do I live in this world to oppose white supremacy? How do I orient my life in both individually and broadly as a people to oppose white supremacy? And you know, when I think of like the great achievement of the civil rights movement and building World House, it wasn't kindness or something cheap about being together with white people, but it was, I welcome you into my World House, and we can overcome white supremacy.
That's what it was.
And
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
and that in effect, I feel is the I guess one of the great achievements of the literacy campaign, to tell somebody in our own way, in our fullest capacity, let's try to figure out how to live together and relate to one another to overcome white supremacy. And it's no, it's not to be taken lightly that we have so many different kinds of people, you know. And I think at first people might actually take it to not what it is. Like, you know, I think when Alice and I first went to like Zion, they're like, "Oh, are you guys students?" Because that's the only way you could conceive of young people that are like so different coming into and just observing, wandering over here into like Zion Baptist Church to see what the life world is of Black Philadelphia. But that new quality for struggle that can bring in this different sectors of society, so there's something very new that the civil rights movement made possible for
There's
all
no
people,
question. Yeah.
that is unresolved, unfinished, that I think we are tasked with and are making great strides in.
And then some bartender.
So I wanted to get in on what Joe had to say. Joe had to move his car, but the Five Eyes is an intelligence sharing agreement with the Western countries, and so sometimes it's called the Five Eyes plus one, because Israel has an even more unlimited intelligence sharing agreement with the
Let's
U.S.
say the eyes mean intelligence.
Yes, the intelligence agency, and the you could basically say the Five Eyes plus one, including Israel, because all five organizations are sharing intelligence, and so these are basically the most powerful organizations, most powerful human orders that humanity has ever seen. So I agree with Joe that they're an enemy of humanity, and when I was talking about Aaron Schwartz, Glenn Greenwald, and Noam Chomsky, that was sort of like my left libertarian days. That's how so I agree with them that they're the enemy of humanity, but it's like what we said with podcasters or even academic think tanks. Um, like I watched, what's his name, the realist thinker from Chicago on the Duran, Mersheimer on the Duran, and even that's lacking because they don't have the answers. Sometimes people at our events they ask us. What do we do then? Okay, we know all this. What do we do with it? How do we reach the people? And it makes me think of the nonviolence definition of power, the Aristotelian, that Martin Luther King would talk about in Lost and Came, which is, power is the ability to affect change. And it also reminds me of one time uh, Phil Logan was talking about, philosophy and power, and he said philosophers can never be kings. But, there's that quote, but what sways the scaffold? Truth sways the scaffold. I think that, the truth,
I think truth forever on the scaffold, long forever on the throne, but it is the scaffold that sways the future.
yes, and, it reminds me of, the story of, Jesus, quite, literally, who do you think had more power, the ability to affect, the world in that situation? Was it Jesus who sacrificed himself for humanity out of love? Or was it Pontius Pilate, the representative of the greatest empire in the world? Who changed humanity more, Jesus or Pontius Pilate? And, so I think what we're trying to say here about, the black proletariat is, and, why we, are opposed to podcasters and mass media is because we're trying to say, or, why don't we, join this or that or form a communist party or whatever. I think what we're trying to say is real power is not the paper tiger of the American empire or the Five Eyes, but real power belongs to the black proletariat, who have in this interesting, a land that they came to become strangers in. They were the ones who generated the humanity. They were the ones who generated the music. They were the ones who generated the dancing. They were the ones who generated, the theater. Everything, it's like what Gandhi said about civilization, that, what do you think of modern civilization? Well, it would be nice. But the real civilization, the civilization elements come from, I guess you would call them world historic people. I would say, and mean the same thing, God's chosen people. And, the Nation of Islam, they claim to be, many, African American religious groups claim to be God's chosen people. Many groups in general claim to be God's chosen people. But only when African Americans claim it is it so, transgressive. Only with the Nation of Islam, they're black Ku Klux Klan, and this is the mass media opinion. But why don't these people have the same right? I think it's exploring, but also being close to these people in their life world. I think that's where we can actually be more transformative. And if you don't believe me, then what was the Bible about?
Yeah, well, I wanted to start with, the first thing I wanted to think, I was thinking about was this question of, what you raised about war and Black Americans participating in war. This is something I think we've heard many times, and this is I think one of the things that is used a lot, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's used a lot to attack the world, where because of how he wanted Black America to move forward during the First World War. And I think this is also very similar to how, one of the fronts of attacks on Gandhi's men is, me, because he is a recipient of the same kind of attack, for the role of Indians in the British Army, at the First World War. And but I think to talk about America and the role of Black Americans, I think this question makes it very clear. It made it very clear to me why we call the Black Freedom Movement the Third American Revolution, because it for the first time made this connection that it made the connection that the perpetuation of the American state as it stands in the world is incompatible with genuine freedom. And it was something new. It's very obvious to us today, but I think this is why we talk of that as a revolution, because it literally moved knowledge forward. It made this connection very clear at that point. And I think this is very true, also for, I was thinking of the same comparison with, India also, because it was, again, a movement of the question for any, the question of any colonized nation in the last, like for every culture in the last century has been like, with the freedom movement, anti-colonial movement, the question has always been on what basis is civilization to move forward. And, I think every anti-colonial movement in terms of like what is going to be the political basis has always had examples of from the world. Like Mao talks about he talks about the examples of the first American Revolution, and for India also the same examples were held in front of the Indian people, that the way forward is social democracy of Western Europe, or communism of Soviet Union, or a philosophy that was forged in apartheid South Africa.
Yes.
It was very clearly held, and the people answered,
Yes.
which way India should move forward. But I think, as I was thinking of this, it made very clear that this is the reason why the black proletariat is unique, because the black proletariat has not had examples, because it is the vanguard. It has been the vanguard of the struggle because it has had to set examples.
Yes.
This is why,
Yes.
and it has always been, held, or it's always there as to be used as examples, and that does not mean to copy a movement and paste it wherever you want, but to understand the principles that were developed in the Black freedom movement, and what the lessons of these principles were, and this has been used throughout the world. And I think, like, I was thinking of this because this question, I think, is going back to like Joe and Alice, what you guys were talking about. I think this question is central because I think sometimes we tend to think that why we're doing, or what the broad end goal of the ideological struggle is. I think sometimes we think that it's a question of, taking people down from power, or there's going to be a future where there's going to be no elite or anything like that. But I don't think that's true, because I think every society is going to have an elite. It has had an elite, but the question is, where do the elite stand and on what basis? Because this is also how Du Bois talks about, like, be it the talented 10 or the guiding 100, but there is the role of the intellectual and the role of the elite. It cannot be circumvented. The question is, on what basis is the elite to function? And for this, the way forward has to be based on study. It has to be based on study and examples of the world over. And I think this is why the question of I don't know if this is a jump, but I think this is why we are also talking about the black social system, because the black social system has its direct implication in terms of the political consequences, and the world as we move forward. No, and I think this is a testimony to the fact that humanity over the world is moving to a new stage of political consciousness. This is why all of these podcasts are, they are so abundant now, because they are a symptom of the fact that people are striving for something, and they are,
Right.
yeah. But that's all.
Go ahead, Jerry. Oh, I'm sorry. Purva, I'm sorry.
You don't mind? Because I was basically going to say almost exactly what Shambartha is saying, but maybe I can just draw upon it a little more, because that is also what came to my mind when we were talking about this question of why, say, Black Americans joined the world wars, And I don't see it so much as like an aspiration to be part of an empire, but an aspiration to be equal citizens, or basically to pledge loyalty to a country that they thought were their own, and they had every reason to think that was true because it was built on their
And they
backs.
thought it would be a reciprocation.
And this is what Baldwin says, that by the age of 5 or 6, a Black child realizes that the country
the flag they salute had not,
the country that they pledged their allegiance to had not pledged the same allegiance back, And this is what Winston talks about this is what in the Paul Robeson documentary that Free School made, we have that part where Harry Belafonte is explaining why all these Black people even went to war on behalf of America, because they thought when they came back, it would have unequivocally established that they were equal citizens, that they had pledged their allegiance to the country. So how could the country not pledge its allegiance back to them? So I do not agree that it was to be a part of empire. It was something more fundamental and human to have the state, basically pledge an allegiance back to you when you were ready to do the same thing. But again, like Shambartu was saying, I think this also clarifies what the role of a revolutionary movement is, because in the Indian freedom struggle, before the arrival of Gandhi on the stage of that struggle, there was the Congress, the National Congress, which had a more moderate position. It was talking about how basically to exist within the framework of being a colonized people, how to get this freedom, how to get home rule limited in its capacity, but to basically assimilate within that structure which was oppressive. But Gandhi and then the freedom struggle that ensued broke from that paradigm and said, no, we want self-rule. We want the British to quit India, and we want Indian people to determine what the destiny of Indian people will be. And here is again going back to the question of the role of the poor. The Indian freedom struggle was a revolution and not just a transfer of power, like people like to put it as, because the Indian freedom struggle made it possible for the poor, the poorest, the peasants, to be a part of the transformation of the country. This is the same thing that happened with the Third American Revolution. The strategy, the political method, the revolutionary method that it adopted made it so that no matter who you were, no matter how poor you were, no matter how oppressed you were, you had a place in the struggle to change your country. Because all you were being asked to do was to become, a freedom fighter with the non-violence as the strategy, which anybody can transform themselves into being. So it created a space for the poor to have a direct role, an agency in the transformation of their nation, right? So that's how I think, this question of, and yeah, I mean, it takes a revolution to get a people to that higher stage of consciousness. That is why King is a revolutionary. And maybe before him, before, all of the work that Du Bois did, maybe there was a vacuum of ideas of how the Black people were going to move forward. But,
But there's the people.
but there's the people. The question of the people always becomes central. So I wanted to say that.
Well, just
maybe
just to that point, I think even factually, it's not like there was a single smooth ride of this. Like that's the reason also why Du Bois was picked as me, was because there was a battle between someone like Du Bois versus like Walter White, who was kind of more on board with we are going to gain civil rights and be on board with the Cold War. So like I don't feel like it was a single set thing. There was only one kind of ideology with that. Like it also didn't also develop over because maybe King started it. But then by the Vietnam War, he had very clearly said Black people, our freedom is opposed to participating in it. And I feel like that's kind of, yeah.
I mean, she had to explain that Buffalo soldiers were one of the most feared fighters against the Native American Indians. And I mean, the Native American fights that were part of the then you had the Rough Riders. And Eric Roosevelt said that he were the one who were against the Spanish. That had been, this is the greatest troops were the Rough Riders. And the whole reason was the family. The whole reason for that was because there's a difference between being colonized and being enslaved. It's two different forms of oppression. When you're enslaved, and then after you got emancipation, Africa, for example, there were 10,000 African Americans, and they lost arms. So it was after black people started to realize that you were not going to be absorbed into the empire with the same privileges that white people had, is when black people started to look at the empire differently.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to be, you look at Buffalo soldiers, the Rough Riders, and the blacks that listened to the military. The whole purpose of going to the military, my father went, okay, was that they felt that once they fought for America, whatever America was, which was an empire, and they came back with bank loans, with financing, with businesses. I had the community, I had the family. It was at the point that they realized that they weren't going to be part. They started having demonstrations with the king, and they realized they were never going to be part of it.
Can I just say one thing? If you don't, oh, go ahead, Jerry.
Well, it's not directly. I had.
Can I just say one thing? See, but I think, like Pulver was saying, you know, trying to work within the system, but then let me just what's more. If you remember, once King was assassinated, we had the two big civil rights acts passed. The civil rights movement took on two big questions, along with racism: peace and anti-poverty. And I know this for a fact that Coretta Scott King, C.T. Vivian, so many of them joined the World Movement for Peace and the World Peace Council. I just want to say that.
Wait, Doc,
Oh.
actually, I was,
The empire had embraced, in other words, after World War I, World War II, they fully embraced, you know, all the things.
But see, the thing is, Du Bois joined with Woodrow Wilson because Woodrow Wilson put forward his 14 points of freedom.
Right.
And then World War II was a fight against Nazism.
Right.
And so, in a certain sense, in both instances, they were not joining the empire. They were asking for a reciprocation in the fight. You know, if we fight for these 12 or 14 democratic points for Wilson, then they will be applied for Du Bois to Africa and African Americans.
Yeah.
So you think that we hadn't been fully embraced with the expectation we had for World War I and World War II, we became full Americans. Do you think we would have these discussions with the world?
I think the American empire could not sustain itself and have black freedom at the same time. The two are incompatible. Black freedom is incompatible with American empire.
Yes.
It's clearer now than ever, you know. But go ahead, Jerry. I cut you off, Jerry, and then Samir.
Well, my
I forgot.
yeah, general thoughts from the discussion are in part, I think, especially for people on live stream, but even for ourselves sometimes, it's kind of easy to lose sight of what we're actually doing and to just treat talk as talk.
Yes.
And to see free school almost as a kind of like talk shop where we just like talk endlessly, which is part of the point of a lot of the, I guess, the podcasts and around the question. But I think to be very blunt about it, part of what I've been in some ways, I don't know if obsessed with, but thinking about a lot these days is, you know, to put it in, yeah, I guess very stark terms, are we in the free school attempting to develop a whole new system of thought, a new science? And I think that we are, but I don't know sometimes if we totally appreciate the enormity of that task.
Yes.
And if so, what is the criteria for that new science? And I think to, I guess, go back to, yeah, like the very beginnings of the discussion with Doc, where you were saying, the criteria is, can you develop a way of thinking, a science, which may draw from, let's say, Marx, which may draw from many sources, but one which is actually able to rise to the level of the reality of the Black poor. And I think that's, you know, whether you call it like quote unquote materialism, or I don't actually know the right way of putting it, but our standard, both philosophically, ideologically, and morally, is basically that. And it's funny because even, I guess, the phrase evidence of things not seen that Baldwin uses can be interpreted in multiple ways. It's a phrase that comes from the Bible. Actually, it's originally used to describe faith, where I forget which book of the Bible, but it's like, but faith is the evidence of things not seen.
Right.
Or like it's the evidence of things hoped for.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I feel like Baldwin also uses it in a more complex way, where on one hand it does describe faith, but also it describes what Emily was saying, which is there is this evidence in American society which is not seen, which is Black people. And not just their suffering, but their lives and their life worlds and their contributions. But I think part of what is unique, I guess, maybe about this iteration of free school, regardless of where people come from, I can only speak for myself. You know, to come to free school to be part of this experiment in some ways, to be part of this group is operating on certain evidence, which I have not seen, to put it in that way, because yeah, like we came here on the evidence of like literally like Martin Luther King. I never lived through the civil rights movement. I don't know I didn't know Black people. Like I grew up in like suburban Dallas with mostly immigrants and like rich white kids. Like that's my life world. That's where I came out of. And so like for us to come here, that was in part, yeah, obviously like a leap of faith, but it's like something that you also have to continually work towards. And the point is not that you are always just kind of like, I feel like for us, the point is not that like we're still continually operating purely on faith, although faith is part of it, but that we're also trying to move closer to reality. And I think this is also part of the like, if there's something that's generative about free school in terms of our ability to kind of like continuously develop new ideas, new and better ways of thinking, it's with the goal of reality in mind, of truth in mind. And I feel like that's very important for me as like a grounding thing. But to be more like specific about it, it's like, yeah, like I don't like in very like plain terms, Philadelphia still is, you could say maybe a very segregated city, in that there's parts of the city that like a person like me is not supposed to go to. That includes Kensington, but also includes many other parts of the city. And I think people in polite society or white society, I think they know that, but they don't say it, or they try to create kind of niceties around it or kind of euphemisms around it.
Right.
And I think part of our task is actually literally to understand, like, okay, like how are people oppressed? What is quality of the suffering? What is the nature of the suffering? Who is participating in the oppression? If it's not, because I think this is part of where I was asking this question of connecting the micro to the macro, connecting the individual to the system, where I actually I don't know how we would formulate it today. Like, how do we understand the role of ordinary people in the perpetuation of a white supremacist social system? I don't know. I actually don't know exactly how we understand, because I think this is also the question of like, even when you say, like, for instance, the Black people having experienced the past 150 years as a long interregnum, that doesn't mean that things haven't changed, right? And that also, or at least
they never have been free.
Yes, but this is my question, because I also want to understand, which is, I think part of it is that, is it possible that there is both the long, like you could think about it in terms of long wave interregnum, but also short wave interregnum, and also overlapping interregnum, overlapping crises, because part of in some ways, part of what we could say is that the unique nature of the crisis of the American system right now is that white people perhaps are the closest they've ever been to Black people, and are the closest they've ever been to actually maybe seeing the world in the way that Black people have seen the world for so long.
Can I ask a question?
But yeah.
Because I think these are all the important questions. But do you see Baldwin answering or striving to answer, creating the framework to answer these questions? And the reason I ask is because I think he does. Because, and for reasons that you give, I just said, you could talk. I mean,
No, yeah.
see, because I think that what makes Baldwin, and here gravitating more towards Emily, that Baldwin is a special thinker for this time.
Right.
And that we have to find that we know it's there, but we have to find it in its fullest and richest sense. Because his thought, his thinking on this is very powerful, especially the macro micro.
Yeah, well, because I think the unique, in some ways, part of what I feel like we were also trying to get at in the roundtable discussion during the DNC event
Mhm.
is, on one hand, the obvious thing about the civil rights movement is that it exposed to white Americans, you have a part in this system as well, and you have a choice.
Yeah,
But
that's
the depth that I think Baldwin penetrates to, which I don't think is replicated anywhere else, perhaps, or is very just unique to Baldwin, is it's not just that white people have to realize that they have a part in the oppression of Black people, but part of what Baldwin reveals is it's also the standards that you have been raised on, nurtured on, are not standards that are worthy of human beings. And that white people, and part of this whole interplay, the kind of relationship, the new creative relationship that the civil rights movement was forging between whites and Blacks, was basically to also give, in Baldwin's terms, to give white people new standards. And to give them a new, actual frame of reference for understanding reality, the world they live in. And these questions of freedom, of democracy, of peace, all of that is kind of wrapped
Well,
up
the other
in,
question is, are you free?
yeah.
Right.
And see,
Yeah.
I mean, I think there is a jarringness to
Yeah.
Baldwin.
Right.
And all of these other celebrations of Baldwin don't want to face.
Yeah.
But he places before white people,
Yes.
do you want to continue to live a lie?
Yeah.
Which is a question that should have been put before the Germans when Hitler was on the rise. I think, if I could just small one thing, that I think from King through Baldwin, in the back of their minds always is Nazi Germany. What if, that's when King talks about the fierce urgency of now, that the German Catholics and Protestants sat back and let this go and said nothing.
Yeah.
And that's for Baldwin, that's why he keeps talking about responsibility. And that's why the human is more important than the individual in ethical, moral discourse.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No.
Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to talk about this for a while, so I'm just trying to jump. This question of the connection between the individual and the social system and how Baldwin uniquely speaks to it. Well, first of all, I agree completely that Baldwin does uniquely address this question, but I also feel like he goes further, where he shows a way to correct, or the correct, in some ways, the correct relationship that the individual can have to the social system or in transforming the social system. And I just wanted to read out this one part from an essay that I have agonized over to fully make sense of, but I'm convinced that it has something to do with what we are talking about here. And it's from this essay called This Far and No Further, where he's talking about the prison industrial complex and the disproportionate incarceration of Black people. But it begins with an analysis of the connection between the state and society that I think is very important, where he says, it is hard to be clear in these matters, yet I hazard that society with a capital S is a direct result of the actual and moral options offered by the state. And yet, on the other hand, the state as we know it is very largely, if not entirely, the result of the actual and moral exhaustion of society with a small s. The actual, baffling, continuing, and wounding relations which obtain among human beings cause us to long for authority as deeply as we long for water. and the personal authority surrenders to a larger one, which, if it cannot save us from death, can protect us from chaos.
Nice.
And then he says, I'm skipping a little bit, but then he says, yet there lives always and with unpredictable results within the human being who is society, something which that society which controls him and which he has created can never know or reach. It is this inchoate, largely incoherent, and irrepressible energy which has demolished empires. Every state without exception co-opts, corrupts, or destroys all those within its proclaimed jurisdiction, and sometimes, as in the present century, beyond it, capable of saying no. But no state has been able to foresee or prevent the day when their most ruined and abject accomplice.
Could you read that? You read that, you read that a little too fast.
Sorry. Which part? The no part?
Yeah.
Okay. Every state, without exception, co-opts, corrupts, or destroys all those within its proclaimed jurisdiction, and sometimes, as in the present century, beyond it, capable of saying no to the state. But no state has been able to foresee or prevent the day when their most ruined and abject accomplice or most expensively dressed prostitute will growl this far and no further. But the last part is also, I think, significant, where he says, or what their children have been watching, or how they will act on what they have seen and what they see. And I just want to say what I think of what he's saying here is he's saying that, you can talk of the American state, and something we discussed last time was the breakdown of the social contract between the state and the people. But he's saying that the social system has a two-way relationship with the state, where on one hand, the social system actually gives the character to the state, which oppresses a people.
Yes.
But then, because the social system is so dehumanizing or reduces the human potential of white people in general, it basically surrenders all personal authority to the state in the hopes that it can be saved. Like white people can be saved by, a powerful
That's
state
right.
or empire.
That's right. This is very important. By the way, and just a small point. This is, I think, the meaning of the Plessy v. Ferguson decision, where the state would protect whiteness.
Right.
So, because Supreme Court decisions are the legal rules of the state's relationship to the people.
Right.
I'm sorry, Isaiah.
Well, so I guess I bring all of that up, and this is not like fully worked out, right? I think we're in the process of working this out. But I think in the question of connection between the individual to a social system and hence to a state, I think it's important to also say that it's a two-way relationship, in the sense that I think the individual or how the individual acts within the social system is a result of the social system, but it reinforces the social
But see, the other thing is, and this is what we work at in our reading group that time. You see, the individual, the state is not morally obligated.
Right.
It is the individual who must take moral responsibility.
Yes.
Another example of the macro-micro link, but I think this is how to read it to begin with. But we should, for next week, perhaps, begin with the discussion of this essay. But could we go to the, go ahead, Sambarta, and then we could go to some of the chat.
Yeah, well, I have just something small to say, but this, like what you guys were talking about, like just now, the question of the, the Plessy,
Plessy v. Ferguson.
Yes, Plessy v. Ferguson, I guess, and this question of as a protected category. But I was thinking that this is also the principle behind identity politics as it is, because more than that, I don't even think just identity politics in that sense, but the way that liberal politics has worked over the last, I guess, close to 100 years. It has the whole like dictum of minority politics and so on. All of it is essentially, it's based on the principle of protecting the one influential minority, that is the elite. And like today, of course, you don't have this. It's not in the same form. Like in whiteness, in that sense, is not a political category, but it's still the same question. It's
I think it is. I think it is logically identical. Logically identical,
Yes.
although different in its specifics.
Right.
Because, you see, I think Baldwin is absolutely right. Once the white masses relinquish
Yeah.
all responsibility that they should have to the state in return, and this is the racial contract
Yeah.
for the state protecting whiteness. You see what I'm saying? And I agree with you that identity politics is but a further logical development of the protection of whiteness. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And we got, be sure, because you're gonna have to get it. Oh, go ahead, Jerry.
Well, I think connected to this, like part of what I said at the beginning about, like, are we in free school attempting to develop a whole new science?
No, we are.
No, but
Not a whole. Oh God, I'm sorry.
no. Well, as part of that, it's you know, the logic of white supremacy is the logic also of the historical development of white supremacy and the white supremacist social
This is
system
very important.
has to be understood on its own terms, but it also
When you say it's on
that it's because I feel like part of what we're not saying is that like quote unquote race is a unifying like quote unquote engine of human history going back.
No, not human
So-
history.
Yeah, but
When we
we're
say
saying
human history,
specifically.
we're talking about. Oh God, I'm
So
sorry.
we're talking specifically about American history. And
Absolutely.
no, but I think as part of that, I think part of where I get worried, I guess, is because obviously white supremacy is a term that's used a lot, and it's also used perhaps maybe the most by the Democratic Party when they're talking about, like, so obviously there's like that whole landscape in which we have to be very precise about it, but also my question is, how do we actually understand like the logic of the development of white supremacy as something that is not like it's not a fixed thing. It's something that changes
That's
and
right,
develops over
absolutely.
time, whether it devolves, whether it becomes more parasitic and more moribund, or whether it becomes more like,
But that is-
where that changes, where those changes.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Law and chance, just
Yeah.
as a general
But-
principle of research. But go.
Well, because
It's
the
not
other-
just the logic, because see, this is where the micro macro.
Yeah.
See what Purba. It's not just the logic of it,
Yeah.
and what Baldwin is arguing is that it is the state, but then there are human beings
Yeah, right.
who
Mhm.
who have moral choices, who made a moral choice to relinquish moral
Right.
responsibility.
Because the
And
last
this might be a very unique American
yeah.
phenomenon. But
Because the other thing I wanted to say, which I tried to work out during the DNC roundtable, but I don't think I did a very good job, which was I think let's say if we say America's in a pre-revolutionary situation, potentially in a pre-revolutionary situation, that pre-revolutionary situation of 2024, or whatever this time period is different from the pre-revolutionary situation which gave birth to the third American Revolution.
and therefore,
Well, I'm just trying to understand the nature of the difference, which is if we also take this understanding of the interregnum, it's that within the broader kind of fabric of white American society, there was not a crisis of legitimacy. In fact, there was a reinforcement of the legitimacy of the system through the Cold War, especially after World War II. The only place where there was a crisis of legitimacy was within Black America, and specifically the crisis of legitimacy of segregation, and segregation as a system of rule.
system of laws.
A system of laws and of rule, therefore, as part of the kind of construal of the American state.
Right.
And part of what the Black Freedom Movement did was, where there was not a general crisis in society, the Black Freedom Movement brought a crisis, like it literally created a crisis that was unavoidable by basically the rest of the country. And I feel like part of what's interesting about where we are now is that there is a general crisis of society, and not just Black people, but white people also feel it. But the the kind of the rub is that what do white people know where to go?
Yeah, no.
Like, 'cause I still listen, I guess, to the podcast, and so I was like listening to like Tucker Carlson and like Tucker's interview with Jeffrey Sachs this morning, which is actually very interesting because like at a very minimum, I think people like Tucker and like Trump are sometimes like they get so hyped up about like the China threat, for instance, that I think it's very easy for them to get kind of like worked up about it and kind of leave this question of war on the table without directly addressing it. And so Jeffrey Sachs is like, but to be clear, if America gets into a war with China, it would mean like basically the devastation of humanity. And so Tucker's like, oh, like I have to admit, like, oh yeah, you're right. Like war with China would be bad. Where I feel like I don't know if he's like fully comfortable with it, but the larger thing is like you were saying with John Mearsheimer, there's like a poverty of like ideas, a poverty of the sense of
two ways of that.
of like the future of humanity and also
What is take Tucker Carlson?
Yeah.
He is a open and really annoying apologist for the white supremacist social system.
Right.
Oh, you got civil rights, the laws change. What are you Black people talking about? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, but see, here is it. This is where. Oh, go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
Like I've wondered for a while, how do we like? Obviously, on the one hand, we have to be actually just truthful. One has to be held to a standard of truth.
Absolutely.
Truth about talking about America. Truth about talking about the nature of this system, of the suffering that people face, of the particular nature of Black suffering and Black oppression. But part of it is like I don't at some point I don't care as much about like the liberal Democrats, and it's like I've become very interested in like how would you actually articulate something like Baldwin's idea of white supremacy to like a Trump supporter.
Oh,
like
well, hold on, wait a minute, before you go any further.
Yeah.
See this, and here's what I would say. And this is, I think, Baldwin. Why must we get in? Well, I don't want to put it that way. Who must know this? And who, if they know it, will make a difference? I think, and I got a friend, Black people only a minority, our votes. No, Black people are the central dynamic force of American history. Yeah. It is the Black question around which all of the critical moments in American history have revolved.
Right.
You know, I mean, I think, I'm not just, I mean, maybe it should be, but see, I think that you start there. And that's where we would differ with Gerald Horne. You know, Black people were shunted aside, yeah. But no, they are the central dynamic. I think that's Baldwin. White people will have to respond. The Trump movement, by the way, hometown, you're in a crisis. You might lose, you know, and all your BS. You understand what I'm saying? I think that's where we begin. I think that's where we began today. And I think that's the proper place. I don't think we can't go anywhere else. That is, especially for us, that is our base, that is our home. And I think and this is honestly, I don't mean to overstate this. In this year of Baldwin, we're being looked at in a different way. There are people who love the free school and love what we are doing and love y'all because you're young and doing this, that you'll never know. That you'll never know. You don't have a chance to say it to you. This is not insignificant. You win, I would say, even you win Black people, you win the nation. Okay, so let me
I know we want to read the comments, so I'll try to be concise.
No, go ahead.
But I think this is why this question of whiteness and reality and evidence makes the conversation around the DNC and immigrants so important. Because they're trying to convince you of a certain reality, or not convince you, actually ask the public, are you willing to accept this reality that we've given you in order to make certain compromises about the world? Which is that to not see the evidence, and to say, oh, actually Trump or the people who are agitators, so forth, like they're just pessimists. Like actually there's hope and there's love. And they want you
joy.
and joy. And so oh, did they say love? I don't know.
No, actually, well, I saw the New York Times word count and they only use the word love like 5 times.
But essentially they're trying to because actually something that before we went to see Kensington and before we went to see I guess parts of North Philly, we went to Kennett Square before. And that's essentially whiteness in the sense of you accept this idyllic area with no poverty, no violence, where it seems like race doesn't matter. You know, you and I can go into the store differently. And immigrants are also sold white.
And I looked at funny.
Yeah, and I mean, people are still nice to you, and you can get great sandwiches. And so immigrants, particularly, and I'm harsh on immigrants because I'm harsh on Chinese Americans now, which is that you can accept that. Yeah, that's right. But essentially, we have. I mean, many of us here sitting here could have gone to Kennett Square, could have accepted that, to ignore the evidence, to not see the poverty, to not question the state and the relationship with the state, and then to accept war with the rest of the world, accept poverty, accept that there is a crisis that's going on. And I think that's why the DNC is so malicious, because, or not just the DNC, but also the choice that it presents to people. And I'm forgetting where I'm getting with this, but essentially that's why it's important. And also, I know where this is going. Essentially, for free school, it's a thinking to create a way or to envision a way of thinking that is based on the Third American Revolution that allows actually people the choice to see. Because someone like Michael or someone like North Philadelphia, I don't think any of us would have been able to understand had it not been this way of thinking. I mean, Samir was at Temple, and who else was at Temple? I forget. But you can see, there's for immigrants, there's no way of seeing the evidence in this country unless you have this thinking. Right. But I think the task of free school is not only to just create this way of thinking, but also to see. I think that's why because I think for many of us, we're trying to form this science, this way of thinking. But then I think the other part is, which has been strengthened through the year of Baldwin, which is that we have been able to interact with people. And what does this thinking actually mean in the lives of people? We get to interact with, I guess, the high school students. We get to interact with those homeless that are at Parkway Central, and then also to see what the science actually means in the lives of people, and so that I think this is where I'm getting, which is like, what is the way forward now that we have this way of thinking, or that we're trying to form, now that we are able to see, is there a certain strength and capacity to people that can be built?
But could I say something? This is the big question that is hard to answer before the fact. Because I said this to Seraphine a couple of years ago, wondering about Black people. Do we have it to do it again? I mean, we've been hit hard. We just don't know. But that does not mean we do not do what we are doing. But it has to be the only way, like you said, to immigrants, like your father and mother, Emily, the only way they can understand America is to understand Black people. That's everybody. The Trump supporter, oh, you're angry, you're upset. Well, let's go back to a period where other people were angry and upset that you may not have given a damn about. But now the chickens have come home to roost. They are called black people. You know.
No, I know, yeah.
You know, and that's and if and but they have even been changed by something that they don't even realize.
Right.
Which to me, go ahead, Jared. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well,
Finish
I
what
guess
you
this is maybe a larger question for this discussion or exploration, but you could compare the past, however many decades since the assassination of King,
Right.
to the period after the counter-revolution that defeated, Reconstruction.
Okay.
This is part of my question of how would we compare that period of Jim Crow, the fruit of the counter-revolution against Reconstruction,
But see,
the
this is what
counter-revolution against the Third American.
this is what makes the Third American Revolution a revolution. They took a lot back, but there's some things they couldn't take back.
Yeah.
For example, I don't think there'll be another Plessy v. Ferguson.
Yeah.
They just can't operate that way anymore because
Yeah.
the Third American Revolution set a floor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
So
saying?
what are the new possibilities that
Well,
were created?
Do they have that many?
No, I mean for the people.
Well, first of all, does the ruling class have many? I mean, yeah,
Besides war.
precisely.
Yeah. Right.
Precisely.
Wait, I'm just going to make a short comment, mostly because we're going to talk about this more, and I don't want to forget. Is what Alice was also saying. I think a Baldwinian way of framing what the DNC is trying to do in all of its virtue signaling and trying to appropriate the Black freedom movement. And Baldwin says this: they're trying to make Black people accomplices in their own murder.
Right.
And
Right.
the reason why, and I think this is also what I got
Where
out of
did you get that from? That quote?
where we put it in the documentary. He says that to he says that to Dick Cavett when
Dick Cavett.
he's trying to ask him, don't you think any progress has been made? I mean, Black people are doing better, aren't they?
Right.
And then Baldwin blasts. And it's part of that. But what I got from how you the quote that I read out has been difficult for me to fully, because I think it's really deep and I only get about 50% or 60% of it. There's still a lot. But I think what you said to it helped me basically clarify for myself what the essence of it is that he's saying that there is that problem if you sacrifice that personal authority to the state, hoping that the state will save you. You basically, you are basically already, you've put yourself out of the game.
Yes.
You put yourself out of the fight. But then what the second paragraph says is to bring it back to that human agency, that the human being through a moral choice, even the most abject accomplices of the state can one day say this far and no further.
Yeah.
And I have realized that the only thing that can save me is the moral imperative,
That's right.
is the
Yes.
moral choice to transform the social system and hence the state.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say it like that because I want to remember.
Let me again. Please remember that, Shantanu.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something really quickly, which is this entire conversation is really interesting and very important. And it reminded me of, making words we're reading down at the cross. And I don't know why I vividly remember there's this part where Baldwin makes this beautiful argument where he is outlining, you must remember, Doc, that he's beautifully outlining why it was so easy for Black people to believe the message of the NOI.
Yes.
And, at the end, he says that if we believe everything that white people have said about Black people and we turn it on its head, it's very easy to believe that it's white people who are the invention. And right before that, right before he begins that part, he has this part which I understand a lot better because of today's discussion, where he says that there has been a deliberate and cruel attempt to hide Black people from themselves as a historical entity and as a human being. And I feel like this is, and then, he also says right after that, that the power of the white world is threatened whenever a Black man challenges the definitions of the white world. And I think that that remains true till today. The only thing that has changed are the definitions. I think that the Black man is still challenging the definitions of the white world, but I think that the definitions have changed. And this is exactly what I think the Democratic Party does in its attempt to appropriate the Black freedom struggle. It changes the definitions of what the world actually means, but actually keeping
I
them.
would say it changes it. Would explain a little bit more when we say changes the definitions.
What I mean by changes the definitions is these standards to which Black people have really never wanted to conform to. At one point, if you did, this is why I think that they can say something like, oh, everything has become better. The Civil Rights Act has changed the world, and now Black people are free. But
the corollary to that is now that you're free, you have to change yourselves. But we white people don't have to change.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
No, that's true.
Which gives even further significance to the Black people's claim that the white man is the devil. Because it makes all the sense in the world because he acts in a devilish way. As soon as you get to one point of the discourse, they want to change the terms of it and the definition. I'm sorry, Shati. I'm sorry.
No, that's exactly what I was trying to say. It's because keeping themselves constant, everything around them has to change. And then you have to do something more and more drastic in order to sort of be a challenge. But then your previous definitions have kind of changed, if that makes sense. But the reason
That's very important.
I think the reason I bring this up is because of this conversation between the state, the social system, and the individual.
Yes.
Where if we are to believe that it is the individual that has the potential to change himself and thus the social system, and we're saying that by relinquishing this ability, the state, I think that this is where Romberto's point also comes in, is that the state also, having gotten this power, tries to distance the individual from the social system.
I'm sorry.
No. I know this.
I know
this feels. This is exactly what I was thinking about when you were talking about the micro and the macro, where I know you are talking about a rupture, but what I was thinking about is that by the application of queer, feminist, LGBTQ propaganda, you move the individual farther and farther away from that capacity to change the system. Like you make the individual more self-absorbed, more self-involved.
But see, and this I get this from Michelle's essay. See the thesis, the assumption of the LGBTQ movement is that we will relinquish our responsibility for social change and so on in exchange for the state protecting us.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? It's a calculus and it is calculated.
Yeah.
And it is calculated by very brilliant people who don't show their, it's like the poker, they don't show their whole, but they're playing a card. So it is I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm just saying that what you're saying, I agree with on that.
And the last point that I'll just make is that, I started by saying that Baldwin says that Black people have been denied this opportunity to face themselves as a historical entity and a human being
but I think that they have also been hidden away from white America, the rest of America, and the rest of the
But that's
world.
what the LGBTQ, that's what identity politics, that's what postmodern, to take Black people off the table. You don't see the Black poor as the genocide, one child at a time goes forward. And you say, and that's why the histrionics and drama of LGBT, oh, I'm so outraged that you won't let me have a drag thing in the elementary school. You understand what I'm saying? And then you get Black intellectuals who become a voice for that, you know? Yes, it is. It is a well thought out and developed strategy. Intersectionality, as it is developed, critical race theory, which is an intersectional theory, intersectionality theory, is to diminish Black people's role as a world historic people, but as a people who are suffering. And so you take Black suffering, you take Black contribution off the table, get it out of the way, and let's have the Pride Parade through your neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? Go ahead. I'm sorry. Oh, speak up.
To get it out of the way because you're not going to do anything to change.
Yeah.
Yep. Them not going to change. Thinking about the other thing I was going to say about them not being able to change is thinking about the indigenous population of this country, all the trees that were that right there will tell you whatever enacting law, put on paper, giving lip service. It really.
Hey, Rhonda, can I just ask one question, get your opinion of this? Because I know there have been scholars, Gerald Horn in particular, who criticize Black Reconstruction in a little shady way, that Du Bois should have dealt with the Native American question and the breaking of treaties in Black Reconstruction. Can I just ask your assessment? Were all the breaking of treaties with Native American tribes and nations, did they measure up to the counter-revolution against Reconstruction? And if you know what I'm saying, and the Plessy v. Ferguson.
Did they measure?
Because, I'm sorry.
In that comparison, what
Consequence.
Or are they even equal? See, this is you don't have to answer it. And we, maybe next.
indicative of what you're dealing with. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I hear. See, this, because this is then thrown at us too. You know, the Native Americans, yada, 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 yada. You know, as soon as you say the Black question, well, what about the Indians? You know what I'm saying? But you can say the Indians, but they don't ask, well, what about Black people?
Right.
If you ever notice, it's always that we got to answer about everybody to even talk about ourselves.
The government can't stand behind its word.
I agree with that. I agree with that. But I think I agree with you. But just this brings up this other sticky question of every time, I mean, not every time, but like if you go for, we're talking the way we're talking.
Right.
Somebody say, well, y'all don't want to talk about what about the Native Americans?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Native American question, that's slavery. That's what
This is very interesting. This is,
They're distinct, yeah.
okay.
They're not the same. I agree with that.
I think
One is extortion, human capital.
Yes.
The other one was extortion of natural capital, land, resources.
This is very interesting. This is so interesting. Okay. Okay, can we do some of the comments?
okay. Yes, we can.
Sitting next to you. so
Yeah,
I
you can
look at
read
them.
many comments. Let's see. Bombala 7 says the US empire has become a dangerous entity for the rest of the world. Questioning their role as the so-called moral guardians. I should say self-proclaimed role as the so-called moral guardians of the world. M. Spark says, great job on the documentary. I think other people down below also say so. And that the ruling class, I think, is having champagne and cheese whilst wearing silk suits and proclaiming innocence. And then this was in regards to your, I think, your ice pick. Somebody down also, I think, said that they.
You wanna get ice pick?
Where can I buy an ice pick? I'm single-handedly buy the ice pick.
The ice pick is fine.
Let's not talk about that right now.
Yes, yes, yes.
You can get it REI.
No, no more ice pick.
No more ice pick.
Ice picks.
Okay, so there were some comments, I think in regards to the podcasters and the left, where I think Fired Play and M. Sparks were the ones last week who were very positive towards the Revolutionary Blackout Network, said this is disheartening. They still disagree and think that it would be great to see dialogue under the need for solidarity. Also positive comments about Garland Nixon and Caleb Maupin.
What they said.
Doing great work. Love my boy, Garland Nixon.
Okay.
Cool. But that, yeah, there's an opportunity missed to grow. Let's see. They're asking about Jill Stein and Butch Ware, Jill Stein's running mate. Let's see. Radhika Desai. Yeah, Fired Play is very committed and interested in hearing an in-depth conversation between the two groups still.
Which two groups?
I think Revolutionary Blackout Network.
Well, the thing is, I think they know about you at least because I've seen them. They've shared a video of you speaking before, and so I feel like it's. But I think part of the difficulty of translating like what we're talking about is I feel like Revolutionary Blackout Network. I know that they do have this like work in the streets, but my impression, which may be wrong, but my impression is that their primary goal is to grow an online audience.
Yeah.
Our goal is not that. We are online, but our goal is like actually relationships to bring a new discourse specifically into the city of Philadelphia, but also like in a broader sense. But I just feel like it's hard to translate like what we're actually doing in free school as like our primary focus is not like growing a following on like Twitter.
No, we're not podcasters.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I would just ask the person, if they're Black and revolutionaries, why aren't they celebrating Baldwin? God's revolutionary. But that's all.
Okay, Bombala 7 says mainstream news always has a political agenda. Baldwin, mainstream news always has a political agenda. Baldwin was free from mental slavery, a true free thinker and Renaissance man. That there is a gradual indoctrination to believe in the system of mental slavery. And then President Jesus said, too much podcasting drama. Why can't we all get along? Slightly misses the point where the point is not to stoke drama or highlight disagreements, but I think to actually clarify what we're doing in these 6 months that have passed and where we're trying to go. And yeah, I think for us, like, this is where we meet to actually figure that out for ourselves. We happen to live stream it because we want to be transparent or let people listen in. But I feel like this is literally where we meet to work
But
out
also
our
not
ideas.
everything needs to be
Yeah.
gotten along with.
Yeah, the
because
point
some
is not
things
to
are
get
just
along,
plain
just to
wrong.
get along. And so like it might not be like pleasant, nice, but I don't think that's our purpose. Fired Play was responding to I think the back and forth conversation between Joe and Alice on China and said, I don't know what this is in response to, but I felt that the summer I was in China.
The materialism.
Materialism. What I didn't like was the mall culture. It's part of what I hated about the USA my whole life. Granted, I was mostly in Shanghai, so I imagine it's not like that everywhere else. Also said, the recent documentary you did is fantastic. Bambalai 7 says intervention is necessary. You all are helping people to think for themselves. I see in my own family that detrimental epidemic of keeping up with the Joneses. Yes, I think this was in response to Shantanu talking about changing the definitions of like whiteness. But Bambalai 7 says, yes, I think changing the terms and conditions is a better phrase. And then said spot on, Doc. Loady says, excellent discussion. How would you all deal with the stifling and ultimate failure of Baldwin's contemporaries, for lack of a better word? For instance, Huey P. Newton comes to mind. What is the lesson to be learned? And then Fired Play in response to, I guess, what we just said about Revolutionary Blackout Network is that they're growing chapters doing mutual aid and organizing in their communities as well. Yes. Well, I just wanted to say like one short thing, which is more of, I guess, a prelude to like what it seems like we'll talk about next week. But I think this idea of white people or individuals basically abdicating their own morality and authority to the state in exchange for protection and in exchange for basically having to think for themselves and take responsibility and instead willingly engaging in like the habitual subconscious things that society, like the white supremacist social system, sets up as an alternative to actually living as a human being. I think then like that's what actually hollows out the individual as a shell, as opposed to like being a human being who takes responsibility and is integrated into that responsibility. But I also think that that abdication of yourself to the state in exchange for protection is actually a large part of how the social contract, I think, is understood. Where I feel like it is a classic thing where, you give up certain freedoms in exchange for protection. And that protection is something that you cannot achieve on your own. It's something that needs to be, for instance, like supported by a military or supported by like taxpayer dollars and things like that. But I think part of what we're also interrogating is like a real social response to like a state collective, but rather like a social contract for the human being and for humanity. And so
See, but isn't this the Achilles heel of the Trump movement? Because in a certain sense, if you read it in a certain way, what they are saying is the state has not protected whiteness adequately. If you read it, now I don't know how many would think that. The other thing is that, well, we don't have to take any responsibility for race and racism and Black suffering because they are wards of the state. You know, it's all kinds of machinations going on here.
Well, I think also part of what this thing of Baldwin as the representative or the spokesperson for like suffering and Black suffering in particular, and I think just really staying grounded in like those roots, I just think is really important. Where I think, the Trump movement and the white working class, like we see all of these things as symptomatic of a crisis and symptomatic of human suffering in America. But I think with Year of Baldwin, and I think like with the reading groups are also like who we look to, it's like there is already, I think, an example of humanity. And it's a question of whether broader sections of American society can join with that pre-existing like tradition and history, which is that of like the Black worker and the Black poet.
See, but this I would agree with you completely. But see, Baldwin he puts a high bar on white folk. And, you know, because he keeps referencing our maturity. And then he always talks about white people as adolescents and not wanting to grow up. And all of this, all about young looking, you know, I'll never grow old type of thing, innocent, you know, and he is saying that's a cover for other. So I think that's it. And the state accommodates that for as long as it can. And
which is why I think part of what I'm I guess, trying to work out or I'm interested in is how to still see and look for those people and speak to them without accommodation, essentially.
Yes, yes.
Can I add one small thing to it? Is also Baldwin has something to say about the role of an artist in these times also, where he says the artist can be the bulwark between the people and the anonymity of the state. And
You say a bulwark between,
the
or
people,
what do you say a bulwark between? Is it
I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember, because he just says the artist is the bulwark against the anonymity of the state, a phrasing that I've been
okay.
that I think is very important
I
to
see.
work out. And what I get out of it is when you say the anonymity of the state is to basically obscure this relationship that we've been talking about, this abdication of a personal responsibility to the state in pursuit of a certain safety. And the anonymity comes from that never being said, that never being directly addressed, or
Did you say anonymity or enormity?
anonymity.
Okay, I'm sorry. Forgive me.
No, that's how I say anonymity.
Because I feel like
I'm sorry.
I guess part of the complexity is that both the Trump movement and the Democratic Party offer two different kinds of safety and two different kinds of like a certain relationship to the state. Because I do think that the primary appeal of Kamala and the Democrats is that they offer the image of a kind of safety or security, and of like the whole narrative is, things aren't where they need to be, but we're making progress towards it. That's always the language that they use. And I think the question is whether not just the Blackness leadership class, but the Black people in their majority will actually buy into it. And it seems like they won't, but
it's interesting, isn't it?
But I think just to also add to what you're saying, or just rephrase it for my own interpretation, it's that part of what a revolutionary movement does is to clarify that people actually have a choice.
Yes.
And I think this is, like Baldwin told, like this is where it's like the moral choice, like kind of no longer is an abstract question, but it's the most concrete question for people to face.
That's right.
And this is what the Black Freedom Movement did, but this is in part what the task is today.
And that's what Baldwin said.
Right.
That Martin Luther King made these huge questions matters of each individual's heart.
And this is, I think, what we do, like, not to tout ourselves too much, but I feel like that is what we tried to do in free school in our own way. And that's part of it is like literally through the lives that we're leading, which is like, we don't have everything figured out, and like obviously our lives are not perfect, but like at a bare minimum, like I'm confident in saying I'm not going to rest until I've actually made my contribution to actually changing this country and to hopefully like making the world a better place. And there's many ways I guess to sugarcoat that, but I feel like part of it is like like you were saying earlier, like free school is always going to stay on post, and we're always going to stand for that. And and I think people recognize it, like you're saying, like more people recognize it than maybe we estimate or maybe we know. Because I don't know everything and I don't know everybody, but it's I think even in the circles that I do know, I think people do see free school and they do recognize like, oh, like these people, I don't know everything about them, but they seem very strangely committed. And it's like, oh, like what am I going to do in relation to that? And I think in some ways, like you have to, like, not even without being even like sometimes even without even being directly confrontational, it's like you do still force a confrontation within people of like, oh, like why are these young people so like fierce and like so like fiercely committed to this struggle? Like why are they expending so much energy into this? And it's like, what am I doing with my life?
Well, I even have that question.
I mean, we get
No, but I mean, it's also interesting because for us, what's also might be appealing is that, we are young.
Excluding me. I understand.
But we are young, and I do think the people of free school are not immune from the pressures of the society. Like many of us here are Asian women, and there is a certain I mean, Samira talked about men earlier, but Asian women are also expected to be, I don't know, cute, submissive, whatever it is. And I think what is important is that it's important that we fight for preschool also through our own maturity too. Because I think, I mean, Samira's like, what does it mean to be a man? But I think a huge question for me coming to Philadelphia was also, what does it mean to be a woman? Because I don't think I really understood that until, I mean, I reading about figures like Diane Nash and Coretta Scott King, but also with Catherine Munt. I was like, it was Black women that taught me about what it meant to be a woman and not a girl. And it is all related to our politics because a girl is different from a woman. A woman actually stands up for something, is responsible for something. And also the relationship with men too. I think there is something about the infantility of American culture that distorts, like, you know, how Baldwin talks to Audre Lorde, the relationship together to be able to build a different society for the child. But I guess I say this to say, like, it is true, which is that this question of maturity is important because I think many of our peers are confused. Why, like, what is preschool? Why is it that you're so committed? Because what's standard in our society is that for young people to not be committed to anything but themselves. And, but I guess I'm not quite sure.
It's just a small thing. I think this question is very important that you raise. And maybe we could just, at some point, I guess, the Audre Lorde, Baldwin, but also Baldwin being interviewed by, remember who?
Richard Goldstein.
Richard,
the Village Voice.
No. You know the film, the documentary.
Nikki
Jeremiah got it.
Nick, yeah, I'm sorry. But I think it's very important because if you look at the two, just those two, it is about men and women, Black men and women. Because Audre Lorde, if you remember, takes a position that Baldwin could not live with. And was not implicated in. She wanted.
Why?
Yeah.
The future, like the revolution.
Yeah, because she wanted to implicate him in all of the brutality of violence of Black men against Black women, right? And I think Nikki Giovanni did it a little different, but I think it's worth exploring. I agree with you about
I
that.
feel like because I've seen clips of the Nikki Giovanni Baldwin discussion shared on like Twitter, and I think oftentimes young people they side with Nikki. And they present Nikki as the more progressive.
Well, they always side with Audre Lorde, I can tell you
and
that.
Baldwin as the more conservative.
Yes. Wow, and how do they do it? How do they argue?
Well, it's because I think it's like there's it helps if you like kind of remove clips and just show like 20 seconds as opposed to the whole conversation. But I think a lot of it is like when Baldwin's like, or they're trying to say, yeah, exactly what you said, that Baldwin won't take quote unquote responsibility for Black men.
But what it does is, well, the reason why I think it's important to say that the question of men and women is not a question with great importance in of itself, but rather the question of men and women is important because it has to do with the future. Like, why are we on this earth in the first place? Like, I'm not here for myself to get the most from my own life. I'm here because I am a revolutionary. And if I'm not comfortable calling myself revolutionary, I'm concerned about the child. I'm concerned about the future. There's something beyond just myself. There's about my purpose is for beyond myself. And that's why young people take Nikki Giovanni's side of it. Because beyond just saying it's about identity politics that young people like identity, it's also because Audre Lorde and Nikki Giovanni justify an entire logic of even doing your own life, where you don't have to take, it makes you comfortable to not take responsibility for anyone other than yourself, especially the child. And that's why it goes along with this whole thing of the most radical thing you can do is to take care of yourself. Versus Baldwin says the most revolutionary thing to ask is what about the child?
That's
If
right.
I don't do this, then what will happen to the child? What will happen to all the people who need me and who I need?
Yes.
Like, that's the difference.
I think the Nikki Giovanni interview and the people who side with Nikki Giovanni is a perfect example of this narrative which attempts to sort of almost sever a relationship between something that is being discussed from both the history and the future. Because I remember that Nikki Giovanni was talking about her father and was saying how her father was abusive towards her mother, and Baldwin was saying that, well, I've written about my father and you know about my father, but I understand him.
Something happened to him.
Yeah, there was a social system that broke him down, drove him to insanity, and we were looking at the consequences of that. It was not within him to behave that way. But Nikki Giovanni she was not convinced really. She was like, no, I am only concerned with that little bit of what was affecting me. Right? So there's this disconnect between a person's individual life, the greater society, the system that produces the individual as well as the society, and anything to do with whatever produced that person or whatever that person is responsible to in the future. And like Baldwin, I was getting very mad at Nikki Giovanni, but then it was pointed out to me that look at Baldwin, how he's so kind to her, how generous he is with her, how he never raises his voice and says, "But Nikki, listen, this is takes her in very good faith." Because he sees some of himself in her. Because because I think that he also felt that anger, but then I think he reached a place of maturity where he understood his responsibility. And I think that till Nikki Giovanni is still alive and she's very old, and I think that till today she hasn't taken that responsibility.
I think you're right. Because she has constructed a whole narrative, which is probably made up of half truths and untruths. I think I felt what you were feeling about. But let me let Joe go ahead.
What did the Republicans do when they realized that they can no longer make the
Could I defer that question to next week? Because this is the question of the state, the mediation, and the breaking of the mediation of the state over human moral possibility.
Right.
But y'all, I think it's about time to pull up. And it's been a long day. And everybody has to go home now and take a nap. Okay. Bye to everyone.
Bye.